Hey guys, tonight we ease into a life you've probably never daydreamed about, but you might never forget again. Imagine sitting before a gilded plate of roasted swan, the scent soaked in cloves and cinnamon, your stomach empty from hours of waiting, and yet, every bite you take is a test run for someone else's survival. The medieval king's food taster didn't wear armor or carry a sword, but every meal was a battleground. You weren't celebrated for your bravery, you were usually forgotten, or worse, resented for staying alive. This wasn't a glamorous job, and it definitely wasn't voluntary. But it tells us something haunting about power, how it doesn't just corrupt, it also consumes quietly and slowly, one meal at a time. No banquet shows this better than the royal feast, where everything gleams except the person whose job it is to swallow first and pray later. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive in the kitchen before sunrise. Long before the first noble stirs, the air is thick with smoke, tallow, and something vaguely acidic. You duck under low beams, slide past burly scullions carrying pails of blood, and try not to trip over the spit dog snoring beside the hearth. Your shift has already begun. You were born into this your father tasted for the king before he mysteriously stopped breathing in his sleep. You don't remember volunteering, but the steward said your family owed a service, and that was that. You know the kitchen's rhythms now, the head cook shouting like a battlefield general, the slow hiss of boiling pottage, the slap of eels on wooden counters, and all of it builds toward one thing, a royal meal that could kill someone. You hope it isn't you. Most people think the food taster just samples the plate and gives a thumbs up, like some medieval Yelp reviewer. But it's much slower, much more humiliating. You eat in silence, with at least two servants watching your face for signs of sweat, twitching, or sudden collapse. Your job isn't to enjoy, it's to endure. The king watches sometimes, from the end of a long table, eyes flicking between you and his roast boar, wondering if you'll start frothing. He doesn't really trust you. Why would he? You have access to his food, and the crown has plenty of enemies. Ironically, the person who proves the food is safe is also the most likely suspect if it isn't. You've learned to chew slowly, to smile without looking too relieved, and to praise the seasoning with just the right amount of fear in your voice. Too enthusiastic and you seem suspicious. Too hesitant and you might insult the king. It's not just your stomach on the line, it's your tone. Breakfast is light but risky. A soft bread roll, a bit of salted fish, maybe some curdled milk. None of it's cooked in front of you. You sniff the milk, wince a little, and take a sip. You imagine the poison sliding down your throat, waiting like a time trap. Most poisons don't act immediately, which is the worst part. You might feel fine now. You might even finish dinner. Then tomorrow, you wake up with your lips blue and a priest already mumbling prayers over your bedside. Historians still argue whether some poisonings were real or just unlucky cases of foodborne illness. Either way, you'll be the first blamed if anything happens. If the king so much as sneezes, heads could roll. You just hope it's not yours. By mid-morning, your stomach is already a churning experiment in alchemy. You've nibbled bits of dried fruit, dipped a crust into almond milk that may or may not have been sitting too long, and sampled a bite of venison pie that tasted faintly metallic. You wonder, is that the copper pan talking, or something worse? One time, you thought you felt dizzy. You sat down, bracing for death. Turned out the kitchen was just low on air, and you were dehydrated. Still, the whole castle buzzed with rumors. The taster nearly collapsed, plot uncovered. They even arrested the pie maker. He cried. You felt bad. Then he got reassigned to pig slop, and you never saw him again. That's the kind of job security you enjoy? None. You eat alone, but never unobserved. Someone is always watching. The steward. A guard. Occasionally. The king's steward's steward. It's a hierarchy built on suspicion, and you're at the bottom. They say it's an honor to serve the crown, but this feels more like being chained to it. You're not even allowed to refuse food unless you want to appear disloyal, and you really don't want to appear disloyal. Not after what happened to the last guy. You heard he tried to skip a wine tasting once. Said his gut felt wrong. 2 days later, he was reassigned to latrine duty and then disappeared. The rumor he was poisoned by the steward, just to make a point. You can't confirm it. But you never say no now. Even when your stomach growls in protest, you develop a relationship with nausea. It becomes a quiet companion, lurking just beneath every swallow. You know which spices mask toxins and which ones mimic symptoms. Cloves are especially tricky. They can make your mouth tingle even when everything's fine. Cinnamon, though, hides the bitterness of hemlock better than anything. You keep a notebook of symptoms secretly. Of course, you write it in charcoal behind a loose brick near your cot. If anyone found it, they'd assume you were planning something. You're not. You're just trying to survive a job that rewards your silence and punishes your instincts. At night, you dream of meals where you get to choose what you eat. Sometimes, you even dream of being hungry and liking it. Even the food you trust turns against you. Bread with little green flecks mold. Cheese with veins may be intentional, maybe deadly. Cold chicken that's been reheated near the hearth, with the inner part still pink. You develop a sixth sense for danger. A smell that's too sweet. A gravy that coats the tongue just a little too long. You'd think you'd get good at this. But the truth is, every day is guesswork. Educated guesswork, sure, but still guesswork. And every time you guess wrong, someone else might die, or you often wonder if the king really believes in you, or just uses you as a speed bump between himself and death. Probably both. You are essentially edible armor. And yet, despite it all, there's a strange prestige to your role. Servants nod to you in the halls. The kitchen boys call you Sir Munch-a-Lot. It's a joke, but not a cruel one. You have your own stool at the side of the feast table. You eat from silver, not wood. You're in the same room as royalty, even if it's just so you can fall over first. It's a twisted form of proximity to power. You are necessary, but never quite valued. At best, you are tolerated. At worst, resented. But you've made peace with it. Mostly. You try not to think about the future. There's not much of it. And as the fire crackles and the stews bubble behind you, you reach for the next plate with a calm, practiced hand. You take a bite, hold your breath, and smile. Just another day in the most unappetizing job in the kingdom. The thing about being chosen to taste the king's food is that it's not really a job you get. It's a fate you're given. You don't write a clever letter of intent or impress someone in a trial run. You just wake up one day, maybe a bit too close to the throne, a bit too lowborn to escape notice, or you're the nephew of someone the steward owes a favor to, and suddenly you're holding a wooden plate and wondering how your stomach became national security. No one wants to be a food taster. Not really. It's not a title that earns you respect, it earns you suspicion. But it sounds noble enough to the untrained ear. People outside the castle might think you're some kind of trusted knight, always by the king's side, part of the inner circle. But inside these damp stone walls, you're the canary in the coal mine. If you die, it means the system worked. If you survive, no one thanks you. They just look at the next dish. Historians still argue whether food tasters were considered noble protectors or expendable pawns. But ask any taster, they'll tell you exactly which one they felt like. You didn't volunteer, no one ever does. Maybe you were the youngest of 5 brothers, too frail to fight, too clever to farm, and just unlucky enough to be noticed while helping in the scullery. Or maybe your father was a taster who served until his tongue went numb during a fish course. Whatever the reason, your future was decided without you. The steward told you with all the delicacy of someone announcing an execution date, the king has need of you. That was it. No ceremony, no preparation. One day, you were scrubbing pots, and the next, you were being handed a spoon and a set of rules that could fill a Bible and still leave out the important bits like how to detect arsenic by mouthfeel, or what to do if your throat closes mid-sentence. You learned quickly that your survival would depend not on loyalty or strength, but on observation, instinct, and the ability to keep a straight face when your gut is doing cartwheels. You were told it's an honor. That word came up a lot. So did service. They said you'd be protecting the realm with every bite, that you were helping keep the kingdom stable. But it didn't feel like service when they slipped the iron key to your new quarters into your hand, and you realized the lock turned from the outside. They called it a precaution, in case you were kidnapped. You called it a cell. Still, there were perks, or so they claimed. You ate from the king's pantry, you wore clean robes, you stood closer to the high table than most nobles, but those privileges came with unspoken threats. You were close to the king, which meant you were close to blame. You were the last mouth before the monarch. Anything that went wrong in his stomach might start in yours. One poorly prepared goose, one wrongly brewed wine, and suddenly, you're under interrogation in a dark corridor, begging them to believe you didn't sprinkle anything strange into the sauce. Sometimes the assignment wasn't even food. Sometimes it was drink. The wine steward pours a goblet of red so rich it looks like velvet, and you're expected to sip it with grace. You do. You always do. But you've heard stories of poison hidden in sweet mead or buried beneath the froth of ale. There's even a tale, whispered among the serving boys, of a taster who died after licking a goblet rim too enthusiastically. Turns out the poison was painted into the decorative scrollwork, set to activate on contact with saliva. Whether the story is true or not, it teaches you the first lesson of tasting: never trust anything that sparkles. Glittering pastries, shimmering glazes, even suspiciously polished apples, all of it is suspect. If it looks too perfect, it probably wants to kill you. You're assigned a corner of the kitchen where all your samples are prepared. A taster's tray, they call it, but really it's just leftovers arranged with extra fear. You never get the first cut of meat or the warmest slice of pie. You get what's close enough to serve, but just removed enough to not make anyone else sick if you croak. That's the logic, at least. And sometimes, that logic goes wrong. You once tasted a stew that was just a bit off. You said nothing. The king ate it. You both survived. But the next morning, you woke up with a stomach like a thundercloud and the deep knowledge that you had gambled with royal digestion. It wasn't the poison that scared you most. It was the aftermath. You heard the whispers. Maybe the taster's losing his edge. That kind of talk is poison of its own kind. Slower, more certain. The other staff treat you oddly. They're friendly, but distant. The kitchen maid flinches when you cough. The falconer avoids your gaze entirely. You get the sense that they're all quietly waiting for the day your luck runs out. Some even make wagers. There's an unofficial betting pool among the guards. Will you make it to the end of the month, the end of the season, the next coronation? You once found your name etched into the corner of a bench with a tally beside it. 7 marks. You don't know if it's months survived or times you've been suspected. Maybe both. There's a macabre sense of humor to it all. Gallows jokes about the soup of the day. Bets on whether today's tart will tingle. You learn to laugh, because if you don't, you'll cry. And crying ruins your ability to taste, which could be fatal. And still, despite everything, there's a strange ceremony to the job. Before each meal, there's a little moment of quiet, a breath, a prayer, a glance exchanged with the steward. You take your bite in silence. You chew, you swallow, you wait. It becomes ritual, predictable, comforting. In a way, humans can get used to anything, even danger wrapped in pastry. But the worst days are the ones where nothing happens. When everything tastes perfect and the king smiles and you feel a creeping paranoia that the real trap hasn't sprung yet. Historians still argue whether royal poisoning was common or just feared enough to create the role of the taster. But in your world, fear is enough. Fear builds the walls. Fear sets the table. There's no real training. By the way, no scrolls or schools for tasters. You learn through mistakes, through stories, through your own ever-evolving nausea. Some veterans teach you tricks. Let the soup cool, some poisons change flavor when warm. Drink water after meat, some toxins react with fat. Eat bread between bites, it slows absorption. None of it's official, and all of it feels like guesswork. But it's what you have. One old taster once told you, the job's not about saving the king. It's about dying politely. You laughed. Then he disappeared. Retired. They said, you never saw a retirement party. Every now and then, someone important asks how you're feeling. Not out of care, just curiosity. You say fine. You always say fine. Because if you ever say otherwise, they'll send the physician, and he'll poke and prod and maybe decide you're unfit. And then you don't know. No one does. There's no pension, no ceremony. You're here until you can't be, and no one tells you what happens after. So, you keep eating, keep smiling, keep surviving. For now. The rhythm of your days becomes a kind of nervous melody, an uneasy hum that follows you from the clattering kitchens to the grand dining hall. Every morning, your body wakes before your mind, already bracing itself for the next gauntlet of edible uncertainty. You begin to recognize which meals bring the worst dread. Roasted fowl, especially if it's been stuffed. That's a classic hiding place, so many folds, so many spices to cloak a dusting of something lethal. You slice into the center with the delicacy of someone defusing a bomb, which, in a way, you are. Custards make you twitchy too. Cream and egg can conceal nearly anything, and if the surface is browned just right, you'll never see what's lurking beneath until it's already coating your tongue. The other servants don't share this paranoia. They marvel at your meals, not understanding that what they envy is a plate of practiced suspicion. You have learned to chew with care, to let flavors bloom slowly, watching for that unnatural bitterness, that too smooth texture, and still, the worst part isn't the food, it's the waiting. After you taste, you must sit still. 5 minutes, maybe 10. No one has a stopwatch. You're not allowed to leave. You simply remain there, upright and calm, while everyone subtly watches the corners of your eyes, your breathing, the pallor of your lips. If you shift in your seat, someone notes it. If you swallow too hard, you hear a breath hitch down the hall. You become a performance of survival. Your insides might be twisting into knots from anxiety, or maybe that second bite of venison, but no one wants to hear about your emotions. They want to see evidence of poison or lack thereof, and so you breathe slowly, evenly, like you've practiced, and hope that nothing inside you betrays the illusion of calm. Historians still argue whether these observation periods were based on actual poison detection or simply theater, meant to assure the court that someone, somewhere, was doing something to keep the king safe. But for you, the theater is very real, and the stakes are always final. You're not alone during these moments, though it often feels that way. The steward hovers at the edge of vision, eyes narrowed. The guards exchange whispers. The food scribes tally every item on the platter in case something needs to be referenced. And once, just once, you saw the king watching you directly, eyes not unkind, but unreadable, like someone watching an animal that might be rabid. That was the moment you understood you are not trusted. You are a buffer. You are the human version of throwing a log on the fire to see if it smokes green. You're a test, a filter, not quite person, not quite tool, but something in between. That knowledge sinks into your bones, heavier than any meat you taste. Lunch brings no relief. It's not even about hunger anymore. You eat because it's required. You eat what's brought to you. And while the noble lords compare roast pigeons and trade gossip over sugared plums, you sit beside the feast like a shadow, quietly consuming fragments of each dish with the same dread as a prisoner licking the tip of his blade. One of the worst things about the job is that it ruins food for you. Everything becomes suspicious. Every delight is a potential threat. You can't enjoy almonds anymore, not after learning that bitter almonds can indicate cyanide. You can't trust wine if it smells too fruity, or ale that's too clear. Even water, if stored poorly, can carry things that will curl your stomach for a week. The irony isn't lost on you, surrounded by the finest cuisine in the realm, and yet always on the verge of starvation from fear. Still, there are quiet moments in the chaos, little windows where your body calms and your mind wanders. Sometimes it happens after a particularly safe meal, boiled barley, perhaps, or plain salted pork. The simplicity soothes you, no sauces to hide behind, no colorful garnishes, just food, honest and direct. You take comfort in those moments, though they're rare. You once joked with a kitchen boy that your favorite flavor is bland, and he laughed so hard he dropped a pot. You helped him clean it up, both of you pretending for a second that your life wasn't a knife-edge balancing act. You treasure those seconds more than the gold-threaded tapestries in the hall, more than the king's nod of approval, more than the silver dishes they place your samples on, because those moments feel human, and this job often doesn't. Your body adapts in strange ways. You've noticed it over time. Your sense of smell sharpens. You can detect a sour note in stew from across the room. You taste with your lips before anything touches your tongue. Your gut has grown cautious, almost too cautious. It reacts not just to what you eat, but what you expect. Anticipation itself becomes a toxin. You've started dreaming of flavors, not good ones, wrong ones. A pie that tastes like metal, honey that burns the roof of your mouth. These dreams linger when you wake, leaving you unsettled, checking the color of your tongue in the basin mirror. You wonder sometimes if it's psychological, if you've been trained into paranoia so thoroughly that even safety feels like a lie. There are no tasters guilds, no medical counselors. You learn to handle it or you don't. There was a man before you. Of course, there always is. His name is barely remembered, only that he was quick and careful. You think about him when the days grow long and the shadows stretch across the corridor. What happened to him? Did he fail a test? Was he poisoned? Dismissed? Or did he simply vanish into one of those quiet gaps in history? Historians still argue whether tasters were regularly replaced or held their posts until death. There's so little record, so little memory. You suspect that's intentional. A taster remembered too fondly invites questions. A taster forgotten keeps things tidy, clean, contained. You don't like thinking about it too much, but sometimes, in the silence, you wonder who will think of you when you're gone. Who will remember the face of the one who ate death for breakfast? And then the next meal comes. Dinner, this time. A rich spread venison glazed in honey, a stew of lentils and leeks, marzipan in the shape of little lions. You sit at your stool, you do your job, you take a bite, you smile, you wait. You watch the king raise his knife, you catch the steward's glance, you breathe, you survive another day. You think, briefly, of what it might be like to run, to vanish into the woods and become a ghost. But you don't. You never do. Because deep down, something in you has settled. This is your role now. And you play it. Bite by bite, heartbeat by heartbeat. The kitchen, where your day always begins and often ends, is less a place of nourishment and more a battlefield of smells, fires, and shouting. It doesn't hum like a well-oiled machine. It screeches, rattles, and wheezes like a beast trying to digest itself. The air is never still. Smoke curls from open hearths. Steam billows from cauldrons the size of barrels. And the smell, the smell is a relentless swirl of burnt fat, wet onions, and something that might once have been milk. You get used to ducking under swinging ladles, to stepping over scurrying dogs, to flinching when the cook slams a cleaver down too close to your fingers. There are no quiet voices in the king's kitchen. Orders are bellowed. Names are forgotten. Your boy or you or move. You might be the royal food taster. But in here, you're just another elbow in the crowd. And that crowd is brutal. Elbows fly, pots fall, scalds happen. One wrong turn and you're sprayed with hot lard or fish guts. You learn to move fast and look harmless. The less attention you attract, the better. Especially from the head cook. He's a terrifying man, all beard and belly, with a permanent sneer and the kind of voice that could curdle cream. You've never seen him smile. He doesn't like you, not because of anything you've done, but because your mere presence means his food might kill someone. The taster is a walking accusation, a reminder that trust is a myth and suspicion is policy. He doesn't want you sniffing around his pots, poking at his stews, or sniffing his sauces with that haunted look in your eye. If something ever happens to the king, he knows the blame will start in this room, and while your job is to taste the food, his is to defend it. That makes you uneasy allies at best, enemies at worst. You nod when he grumbles. You step aside when he storms past. You don't correct his mistakes, even when the spice is off or the meat smells old. You just eat it later and hope it doesn't make your teeth numb. The chaos of the kitchen doesn't stop for you. No special plate, no solemn moment. You take your portions from the same serving trays, often while dodging elbows and ducking under shelves. Everything you eat has passed through a dozen frantic hands, and none of those hands are thinking about your survival. They're thinking about timing, presentation, portion size, and whether the goose should be stuffed with chestnuts or apples. You taste under pressure, always. The bread is rushed, the stew is scalding, the custard is runny, and you still have to put it in your mouth and divine whether it will end your career or just give you gas. Historians still debate how much control royal tasters had over what they ate, but from where you stand, it feels like none. You taste what's there. You swallow. You survive. You hope the next ladleful isn't the last. One particularly frantic morning, a new scullion dropped a full pot of broth across the floor. The noise was deafening. The liquid surged like a wave, catching you at the ankles and sending you sliding into a sack of cabbages, your robe soaked through instantly. You scrambled up, heart pounding, already dreading the cook's fury. But he didn't shout at the boy. He shouted at you. That pot was for the king's supper, you twitch-eyed rabbit. Now we've no broth to test. His logic was twisted but clear. No broth means no test. And no test means someone might get creative. You apologized. You always apologize. Later that day, you tasted a fresh batch, rushed, thinner. Too much sage, and spent the evening with stomach cramps that felt like tiny fists punching from the inside. Probably nothing, but you couldn't help wondering what had been in the original pot. You also keep a mental map of who's working each shift, who chopped the garlic, who stirred the sauce, who seemed angry, distracted, or unusually quiet. You've learned the hard way that mood matters. A cook who's furious is sloppy. A servant who's nervous is dangerous. One night, you watched a pastry girl cry into a pie crust. No one noticed but you. You asked her later what happened. She said nothing, just looked away. The pie tasted fine, but your lips tingled for hours. Maybe it was the flour. Maybe it was fear. Either way, you never touched her pastries again. The truth is, no food is truly safe, and no worker is truly neutral. Everyone in this kitchen is under pressure. Everyone has secrets, and some of those secrets leak into the food. You also start noticing strange things. A knife always missing. A bottle of imported vinegar with a wax seal that looks tampered with. Bread with an odd pattern, as if someone had pressed something into it. You point these out quietly, usually to the steward, who either shrugs or takes notes. Once, you told the head cook directly. He stared at you, then tossed the item into the fire without a word. That was the last time you spoke up. You realized then that nobody really wants to know. They want the illusion of control, not the reality of danger. Better to let the taster handle it. That's what you're here for, right? The human firewall, the edible insurance policy. One afternoon, during a feast for visiting nobility, the kitchen went into full siege mode. Boars roasting on spits, swans being refeathered for display, tarts shaped like castles. You were tasting in a frenzy bite after bite, faster than usual, your tongue coated in oil and sugar. At one point, you lost track of which dish you were on. A pang of real fear settled in your chest. You paused, tried to remember the sequence. It blurred. You skipped a custard. You knew it. But you said nothing. The custard went to the king. He took a bite, nodded, and moved on. Nothing happened. Not that day, not the next. But you never forgot that moment. That sliver of sloppiness, that tiny slip. Historians still argue whether tasters had strict protocols, or if the system relied entirely on their memory and integrity. You could answer that, of course, but no one asks you. They only ask if you're still breathing. When the kitchen quiets after a rush, the silence is almost holy. The fire crackles, the dogs sigh. The cook mutters to himself as he scrapes bones into a bucket. You sit on your stool, chewing a crust of bread that's gone cold. Your stomach gurgles, but it's not pain, just exhaustion. You think about how many dishes you've sampled today. 14 more. And not a single thank you. Not that you expect one. Your reward is your own survival. That, and maybe the chance to sit here for a minute without being screamed at. You savor it. These quiet pockets are rare and precious, because soon, another order will come, another plate, another test, and you'll stand, straighten your robe, and march back into the storm. By now, you've come to understand that medieval kitchens weren't just messy, they were mystical. Too, not in a comforting fairy tale sort of way, but in the superstitious, bone-rattling sense that everything edible might also be cursed. The line between food and medicine, medicine and poison, poison and blessing was paper thin and smudged by centuries of half-beliefs and wishful thinking. In this world, you don't just prepare a meal, you prepare for battle. And like any battlefield, it has its talismans. You've worn everything from garlic strings to dried mole paws stitched into your sleeve. Not because you believe in them, though. Some days, you almost do, but because not wearing them makes people look at you like you've given up. The cook has a silver coin nailed to the chopping block. The steward keeps a carved bone in his pocket, claims it's from a blessed pig. You've seen kitchen girls whisper charms over stew, muttering rhymes that make no culinary sense. None of it works, of course, but it's easier to whisper spells than accept that any drop of honey, any shred of garnish, could send you to the grave. Historians still argue whether these practices were born of genuine folk science or sheer desperation. You think it's both. When your life depends on dinner, even nonsense feels rational. And it's not just charms, they actually try to test the food with bizarre tricks. You've been handed a silver spoon and told to watch if it tarnishes. You've seen chickens fed crumbs from the royal table, then waited to see if they drop dead. Spoiler, they usually don't. One knight claimed rubbing garlic on the food would neutralize any poison. Another swore that if the meal didn't attract flies, it was cursed. You once watched the steward wave a unicorn horn over a wine jug, mumbling prayers while sweat soaked his collar. You knew it wasn't a unicorn horn, probably narwhal. Maybe goat, but you didn't say a word. Correcting him would just make you look clever. And clever people aren't trusted in roles like yours. You're expected to be obedient, watchful, maybe a little unlucky, but never smart enough to scheme. And so, you nod solemnly at the horn, the garlic, the muttered Latin, and then you take your bite like the world's most underpaid martyr. Still, you try your own methods, nothing magical, just things you've learned. You take tiny bites from the edge, never the center. Poisons like to hide in the thickest part. You swish the liquid before swallowing. If your mouth burns or goes numb, you know something's off. You wait at least 15 seconds before speaking, which seems silly until you remember that night in October when the Queen's cousin took a single bite of honeyed figs and collapsed sideways into the rushes. You were in the room. You saw it. You tasted the same figs minutes earlier and lived. He didn't. Some said he had a weak heart. Others said he was simply the wrong man at the wrong moment. The figs were cleared. You asked the steward later if the plate had been sent for examination. He said, "It's been dealt with," which is court speak for don't ask again. So, you didn't. And there's another piece of the madness, the paranoia about taste itself. See, everyone's looking at you to detect the undetectable, to sense what science hasn't yet named. But your taste buds are just that, buds, not magical runes. You once asked for a chart to record how certain toxins feel. No one had one. You started making your own notes. You scratched them into wax tablets and kept them under your cot bitterness that coats the tongue. Basha possible belladonna, tingling lips, maybe aconite, sweetness that burns. Check the sugar pot. You weren't trying to play doctor. You were just trying to stay one step ahead of the flavor roulette. But knowledge is a dangerous thing in a royal court. One day, your notes vanished, gone without a trace. You never spoke of them again. You didn't have to. The message was clear. And so, you play the fool. You smile. You eat. You let them keep their myths. You even join in sometimes. You nod when they hang the onion braid near the ovens. You rub salt into the serving platters, pretending it's not just for flavor. And when they bring out the bezoar stone, some hunk of sheep stomach wrapped in silver wire, you act impressed. They say it draws out poison. You say, incredible. Then you take your bite anyway. That's what's so cruel about your job, no matter how much theater they surround it with. You're the one who swallows the risk, not the horn, not the onion, not the priest waving incense near the pastries. You did try to ask real questions. You cornered the court physician in a corridor, gray beard, dry eyes, always smells faintly of vinegar and boredom. You asked him, plainly, what to look for in poisoned food. He blinked, adjusted his belt, and said, "If you're still standing, it's probably fine." Then he walked away. That's the help you get. You're on your own. If you collapse, he'll examine the body. But until then, you're expected to smile through every forkful like it's a love letter from the kitchen. And then there's the matter of appearances. Half the time, the king's food isn't just seasoned, it's sculpted. It's shaped into mythical beasts, towers, even miniature boats. The more ornate it is, the more suspicious you become. Because somewhere under all that artistic flair is still food. And if someone wanted to slip in a powder, a tincture, a shaving of something deadly, it would be in the curl of a marzipan horn or the belly of a molded trout. It's like being handed a jeweled dagger and told, it's mostly safe. The pageantry masks the threat, and you're the only one expected to see through it, to taste through it. You start developing strange habits. You sniff everything, even things you don't eat. You glance twice at platters. You memorize the faces of everyone who carries a tray. You startle easily. You flinch at compliments. You don't trust food that's too warm. It hides too much. You don't trust cold food either. It's been sitting too long. You reach for the bread first because it's the least likely to kill you. And you've grown to loathe sauces, not for their taste, but for their mystery. A sauce is a curtain. A sauce is a liar. Some nights, in your cot, you think about poisoners, not the famous ones from songs and court tales, but the ones who slip through unnoticed. The scullery boy who keeps to himself, the servant girl with hands too clean, the foreign ambassador's cook who watches everything without ever smiling. You imagine them slipping powders into wine jugs, oils into salad bowls, and wonder if they ever look at you and think, this one will find it. Or maybe they don't think of you at all. Maybe you're just part of the scenery, an obstacle they plan around. That's what scares you most, not being targeted, being ignored. Because your job doesn't end when you taste. It lingers in your thoughts, in your dreams. You dream of food every night, not feasts, but fragments. A slice of fruit that writhes like a worm, a bowl of stew that bleeds, a cake that whispers your name before you wake up gasping. You once tried skipping dinner, just to give your brain a break. The kitchen raised eyebrows. The steward frowned. "You're not well," he asked. You said, "Just not hungry." He stared too long, then said, "You'll taste anyway." So you did, because it's never about appetite. It's about obedience. It always is. Of all the strange relationships in the castle, the one between you and the royal physician might be the most bizarre. It's a blend of cold science, mild disdain, and quiet dependency that no one ever quite defines. You're not friends, that much is clear, but you're also not strangers. He sees more of your tongue than your own mother did. Every morning before the first meal, you shuffle into his chamber, a drafty room that smells like boiled herbs and old dust, and perch on a stool while he stares into your mouth like it holds state secrets. "Say, he mutters. You do. He pokes your gums with a slender bronze tool. He smells your breath. Once, he made you gargle urine. Your urine. For clarity, you didn't ask what that meant. Sometimes he mutters Latin phrases under his breath, like he's reciting a charm. Other times he's deathly silent, as if listening for your soul to cough. This man, who treats you like a frog pinned open on his table, is also the first to hear if your stomach turns or your head swims. You have no illusions if he suspects poison. He'll dissect your lunch before he checks your pulse. And if he suspects you've tampered with anything, he'll be the one recommending a nice long stay in the dungeon. Historians still argue whether physicians in royal courts were healers or interrogators. You know the answer both. You've learned not to speak too freely with him. Questions make him suspicious, observations make him defensive. You once asked if numbness in your fingertips could be from eating pickled turnips. He squinted at you, sniffed the air, and wrote something down. The next day, you found yourself invited to fast until evening, just to observe baseline reactions. It's a game. This dance with a doctor. You give him just enough honesty to appear loyal, and just enough silence to stay invisible. But every now and then, you see something in his eyes, curiosity, maybe even pity. You're not sure. It flashes quickly and disappears behind the thick lenses of his spectacles. Sometimes you wonder what he writes in his book after your visits. Do you have a file? A case name. Subject taster. Exhibits chronic paranoia. High resistance to plum wine. It wouldn't surprise you. He has his own routines. He checks your pulse after every meal you taste. Not immediately, no. That would show too much concern. He waits, casually, like he's just wandering past. Then he sits beside you and presses 2 fingers to your wrist, watching the rise and fall of your chest. You try not to breathe too deeply. Don't want to appear nervous. That's how people end up in beds surrounded by whispering priests and herbal poultices that smell like despair. You've seen tasters like that before. 1 minute fine, the next lying still, with the physician muttering about humors and imbalances. Once, he bled a taster who had a headache. The man fainted from blood loss. They called it a cure. You know better now. If your head hurts, you smile. If your stomach flips, you say you're just digesting slowly. Illness isn't weakness, it's ammunition against you, if you're not careful. And yet, you depend on him, more than you'd like to admit. He's the only one in the castle who might recognize a symptom before it becomes fatal. If you drop to your knees with a wine cup clattering to the floor, he's the one who will pull back your eyelids and start sniffing your breath. He carries a pouch of herbs on his belt at all times, things with names you can't pronounce. Some are supposed to slow poison. Others make you vomit. Violently. You've tasted most of them. Not by choice. Once, after a dinner where the king said his tongue felt tingly, the physician made you swallow a concoction that tasted like fermented socks. You threw up for 2 hours. There was no poison in the meal. But no one said sorry. They just patted your shoulder and said, "You did well." You think sometimes about how strange your job really is. Your worth is measured in reaction time. Your usefulness is your vulnerability. The moment you fall ill, the court listens. Not to your words, never to your words, but to your symptoms. You are both alarm and evidence. You are the canary in the royal mine shaft, fluttering quietly until the gas leaks in. The physician is just the keeper of the cage. He doesn't love you. He doesn't hate you. Your data, your breath, your blood, your bile little clues to whether the kingdom's food chain has been breached. There was one time, just once, when he looked at you with something like admiration. It was after a banquet where you had sampled over 20 dishes. You felt fine until hours later, when the world tilted and your fingers went numb. You reported it immediately. He sat with you for hours, checking your pulse every few minutes. You could see it troubled him, not just the symptoms, but that he couldn't explain them. "It may be aconite," he said finally, "or it may be your nerves." You asked, "Is there a difference?" He didn't answer. But after that, he began seeing you more often, testing new ways to check your resilience. You became an experiment, but at least an interesting one. You held his attention. That's something. Not that it protects you. If the king dies, the physician will be the first to look at your body, not with grief, but with curiosity. He'll ask which dish you ate first. He'll ask if your pupils were dilated. He'll cut open your stomach if the steward permits it. You know this. You've accepted it. You might be more useful dead than alive, and you've made peace with that on the long walks between the tasting room and the privy. Still, on good days, he treats you like something more than just a symptom. He once gave you a dried clove and said, "For your breath," and perhaps, to confuse the next poison, you took it. You always take what he gives. Refusing a physician's token is like refusing a soldier's sword. You don't have to understand it. You just carry it. The worst part is that you're starting to internalize his language. You hear a rumble in your gut and think, wind imbalance. You sneeze and worry about excess phlegm. You've started using phrases like nervous constitution and overheated bile. They creep into your speech without permission, borrowed from a man who treats the human body like a puzzle made of bad glue and wishful thinking. But in his own way, he's surviving too, just like you. He serves the king by diagnosing others' weaknesses. You serve the king by revealing your own. It's a hierarchy of vulnerability, and somehow, you're both trapped in it. Once, late at night, you found him in the kitchen, not his usual haunt. He was crouched near a shelf, inspecting a jar. He looked up, startled, and said, "Some poisons smell sweet. Did you know that?" You nodded. He stood, dusted off his knees, and added, "But some have no smell at all." Then he walked past you into the dark. You stood there for a long time, staring at the jar. You didn't open it. You didn't need to. His words stayed with you. Still do. Because that's what the job really is. At the end of the day, not just tasting, not just enduring, it's absorbing everyone else's uncertainty and bearing it in silence. The cook fears being blamed. The steward fears losing the king. The physician fears not knowing. And you fear all of them. And yet, each day, you eat, you swallow, you smile, and you report to the man with the tools and the tired eyes, hoping he doesn't see something you missed. You learn, over time, that your greatest threats don't always come from the obvious villains. The poisoner with a hood, slipping in under cover of night, that's a story for ballads. In truth, the people who pose the greatest danger to you are the ones who smile in the hallway, the ones who laugh too easily when your spoon trembles, the ones who hand you a goblet with just a touch too much ceremony. Your enemies are not distant assassins or foreign spies. They're insiders, peers, jealous colleagues, ambitious nobodies who resent your strange little role by the king's side. It's the baker who thinks you've replaced his importance. It's the wine steward who believes you get better rations. It's the page who sees your proximity to power and mistakes it for influence. And worst of all, it's the ones who think you know something, anything. You don't, of course. You never do. You know as much about palace secrets as a damp mop knows about dancing. But proximity breeds assumption, and assumptions turn into danger. It starts with little things. A sideways glance from the butcher when you pass his station, a missing piece of fruit from your morning tray, a plate handed to you out of order. Just once. Then returned with an apology and a tight smile. You try to brush it off. Paranoia is your constant companion. But sometimes, even you wonder if it's slipping its leash. Then something real happens. A spoiled apple deliberately placed on your taster's platter. Not moldy, not bruised. Poisoned. No, but you recognize it as a message. Someone wants you unsettled. It works. You sleep less. You eat slower. You start watching your watchers more than your food. Historians still debate how many royal poisonings were actually just internal power plays disguised as accidents. You don't debate. You live it. You begin to catalog the faces of potential threats. The smiling fishmonger who always adds just a little extra. The stable boy who suddenly started bringing your breakfast, despite never being assigned to kitchen duty. The lady in waiting who lingers when you taste the queen's dishes, eyes sharp and expression unreadable. None of them ever do anything outright. Nothing criminal, just enough to make you feel watched, measured, considered, and then dismissed. That's what makes it worse. You aren't seen as a person. You're seen as a role, a lever in someone's plan, ready to be pulled or broken depending on the outcome. If the king falls, you'll be one of the first to be questioned. If the king thrives, no one remembers your name. It's a lose-lose arrangement, dressed in velvet and silver platters. One winter morning, you overhear two guards joking in the corridor. They say if they ever wanted to kill the king, they'd just bribe the taster. One meal, one coin, one corpse. They laugh. You don't, because you know that kind of joke always floats above a darker thought. It's never said by accident. It's never just humor. It's a test balloon, sent into the air to see how you respond. You walk past them without comment, but the skin on your back tightens like old parchment. Later that day, you find a silver coin on your pillow. No note, no explanation, just the coin, gleaming in the weak light. You don't touch it. You leave it there. By nightfall, it's gone. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was something else. You never find out, but the message settles into your bones like a chill that never leaves. You become increasingly aware of the unspoken hierarchies around you. Who speaks softly when the king enters, who stands up straighter, who carries platters with their eyes cast down, and who lifts their gaze just long enough to measure reactions. Every servant, every cook, Every cupbearer is part of a living ecosystem, one based not on kindness or camaraderie, but on survival. Power isn't just at the high table, it trickles down in glances, in favors, in shared silences. And you're a strange fulcrum, too visible to be ignored, too expendable to be trusted. Everyone assumes you're loyal, but also that you could be persuaded. No one knows for sure. That ambiguity becomes its own poison. It creeps into your meals, into your conversations, into your sleep. You've stopped eating outside of duty. No more midnight snacks. No bread from kind kitchen hands. No taste this from giggling pastry girls. You've become a creature of ritual and caution. Food only enters your body through official channels, under supervision, on plates you recognize, with witnesses who are equally terrified. It's not just paranoia anymore, it's protocol. The steward once caught you chewing mint leaves behind the kitchen. He stared at you for a full minute, then said, "Let's not make habits that confuse the narrative." You understood. Anything that blurs the line between duty and personal appetite is dangerous, not because of the mint, because of the story it tells. Even your movements are scrutinized now. You can't leave the castle without permission, not that you'd want to. The outside world seems louder now, more chaotic. It lacks the sharp, confined tension you've adapted to, like leaving a snake pit for a jungle. You once dreamed of running, of finding some quiet life in the woods, eating roots and sleeping in moss. But that dream has withered. You wouldn't survive. Not because the world is cruel, but because you wouldn't know how to trust it anymore. Every meal would be suspect. Every hand offering food would remind you of the steward's watchful eyes, the cook's clenched jaw, the coin on your pillow. You've been trained too well, or broken too precisely. Your enemies, if they even deserve that title, are rarely direct. They operate in the murk, in whispers and moments of hesitation. You once caught the wine steward watching you too closely as you tasted a goblet. When your lip curled slightly too sour, he smiled. It wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was pleased, as though something had been confirmed. You forced a second sip and said, "Good batch." He nodded. Later that night, you couldn't sleep. You wondered what he'd been hoping for. Not your death, he wouldn't benefit, but perhaps your failure, your stumble, your crack in routine. Sometimes, in this place, that's enough to make someone feel powerful. There's an irony to all of it. The more you survive, the more suspicious you become. Like a gambler who wins too often. Like a soldier who dodges every arrow. People start to wonder, are you lucky or clever? And if clever, how do you switch dishes when no one's looking? Do you fake your symptoms to cover for others? The rumors don't always reach your ears, but the tone does. The tightening of smiles, the lingering glances. Even the royal hound started growling at you one morning. The queen joked that it senses something. Everyone laughed. You didn't. Historians still argue about the role of trust within court positions, especially those tasked with guarding the monarch's health. Some believe tasters were revered, others think they were scapegoats in waiting. You live the answer daily. Trust here is a currency that depreciates the longer it's held, and yours, it's been spent, borrowed, hoarded, and doubted. You're not part of the inner circle, you're orbiting it, close enough to feel its gravity, far enough to be flung away at any moment. There was a day months ago now when the king himself spoke to you. Really spoke. Not just a nod, not just a grunt of approval. He asked, "Do you ever worry it'll be the next bite?" You hesitated, then answered honestly, "Every time, Your Majesty." He stared at you, long and strange, then said, "Good." Just that. Good. Not comforting, not encouraging, just a satisfied kind of finality, as if your fear reassured him, as if your dread was proof of your usefulness. You remember that moment more clearly than your own name, and so, every meal, every plot, every carefully composed bite is not just about flavor, it's about performance. You are the understudy of death, waiting backstage in full costume. You bow, you chew, you survive, and all the while, the ones around you sharpen their smiles. You learn to fear the unexpected, not the grand, operatic gestures, but the quiet deviations, the dish that arrives slightly earlier than usual, the goblet that looks just a shade darker than it did yesterday, the absence of a familiar face in the kitchen. Routine is your armor, and anything that disturbs it feels like a dagger slipping between the seams. Over time, certain foods become red flags. Almond-flavored sweets, for instance. You used to enjoy them. Now you dread them. Not because of the taste, but because bitter almonds whisper the name of cyanide. It's said that a skilled poisoner can hide it beneath honey, that only the nose will know before the body pays the price. You've practiced, sniffed, tested, but you're not a chemist. You're a body with a mouth. Hoping instinct is enough. Every time a sugared marzipan or a crushed nut tart lands on your tray, you feel your throat tighten before you've even touched a fork. There are other suspects too. Mushrooms, for obvious reasons. Any kind of wine left uncorked. Even rice pudding. If the texture's wrong, you've tasted so many different deaths that now you can't even tell if your nerves are lying or if your instincts are finally catching up. It's the subtleties that haunt you, the things that feel almost but not quite normal. A broth that coats the throat too long, a pastry that crumbles strangely, like it was baked with more than flour and butter. You once bit into a meat pie and felt a burn not from spice, but from something else, something chemical. Wrong. You waited. 10 seconds, 30, a minute, nothing. You told the steward. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Perhaps you're becoming too sensitive." You don't know what chilled you more, is indifference, or the idea that your body might finally be overreacting to everything. Either way, you learned the lesson, trust your senses, but don't expect anyone else to. You've built a personal encyclopedia of poisons in your head, most of them incomplete, most of them gathered from gossip, half-remembered stories, and things the physician mutters when he thinks you're not listening. Belladonna causes blurred vision. Hemlock makes your limbs go numb. Strychnine makes your body seize, lockjawed and rigid. You've seen symptoms in others' courtiers who fumble their goblets, servants who collapse in hallways, noble guests who pale and clutch at their throats mid-toast. Most don't die. Some do. All are reminders. Each incident echoes in your mind long after the halls are scrubbed and the rumors forgotten. Historians still argue whether medieval courts were as soaked in poison plots as stories suggest, or whether it was simply the age's rotten food and worse hygiene. But you've smelled arsenic masked with rosewater. You've seen someone pour from the wrong flask and then bury the bottle beneath a hearthstone. It's not myth. It's breakfast. Then there are the ones who die slowly, the uncommon deaths, the ones that slip past everyone because they don't arrive in screams or spasms, but in silence, in the form of a man who weakens over weeks, a baron who loses weight, starts coughing, loses color. No one questions it until he dies, and someone finally whispers, "His cook was dismissed last month." You remember him. He once gave you an orange. You didn't eat it, not because you suspected him, just because you weren't hungry. That orange sat on your windowsill until it molded and split open, a bloom of green fuzz. You think of it often, that simple gesture, and how easily it could have become your last. Every fruit, every crust, every glass you decline becomes a fork in your life's path. It's exhausting. The poisoners themselves, if they even exist in the shadows around you, are likely not the storybook villains with rings of nightshade and cloaks soaked in mystery. They're more likely to be the cook who never makes eye contact, the steward's assistant who scribbles too much and smiles too little, the ambitious courtier who thinks the king's cousin would make a better ruler. Motive lives everywhere in the castle. Opportunity is rampant. Means, well, anyone with access to a pantry, a vial, or even a dusty herb pouch could do it. The only thing standing between them and royal blood is you, which makes you both the barrier and the scapegoat. You've begun to dream of poisons, not the act of eating them, but becoming them. In your sleep, you imagine yourself as the toxin, not the victim. You seep through goblets, you stain fingertips, you drift into the king's breath as he speaks. In those dreams, you are powerful, invisible, feared. You always wake before the dream ends, breath short, heart pounding. You look at your hands. You still feel like a servant, but for a moment, in sleep, You were something else. Something they watched, not with suspicion, but with awe. Sometimes the paranoia spills out of the kitchen, into the court. You see it in the king's own eyes now and then. The hesitation before he lifts his fork. The way he leans toward you, squinting, as if your facial expressions hold more weight than the food itself. You've become his mirror. If you flinch, he stops chewing. If you nod too fast, he grows tense. If you smile too late, he lays down his spoon. The meal becomes a dance of cues. Your face, the sheet music. He trusts you not because he believes in your honesty, but because your reaction tells him whether he'll see tomorrow. That's a kind of intimacy few people understand, and none would envy. Once, during a private supper, he looked up from a duck leg and asked, "Would you tell me if it was poisoned?" You said yes, but you meant not fast enough. And while every meal might hold death, some do more than others. Celebratory feasts, with visiting dignitaries and too many hands in the preparation. Birthday banquets, where sweets come from obscure regions and wines are gifted in ornate decanters. The more impressive the display, the more nervous you become. You've seen dishes arrive with gold leaf, with glowing sugar sculptures, with rare spices from lands you've never heard of. One time, a pie arrived with live birds inside doves, apparently trained to fly upward when the crust was cut. They flew. Everyone clapped. You nearly vomited from the smell. No one ate the pie, except you, just in case. You wonder, often, what it would take for you to break, not in the poetic sense, not in some dramatic collapse, but in the small, invisible way that happens when someone stops trusting their own instincts. What happens when you no longer know whether a tingling tongue means danger or just cinnamon? When your goudache feels like fear instead of toxin? When you start swallowing without tasting, chewing without testing? That's the real poison doubt. It creeps in more subtly than anything brewed in a flask, and it's harder to expel once inside. You think sometimes about writing your own book, not to publish, not for posterity, just a simple ledger. What you ate, how it tasted, how you felt, day after day. A quiet archive of risk. Maybe someday someone would find it. Maybe they'd understand. Or maybe they'd just wonder why anyone ever agreed to this job in the first place. But you don't write it, because a record like that is dangerous. It turns your fear into facts. And facts become questions. And questions get people removed. Instead, you keep the knowledge in your bones, in your tongue, in your belly. You carry it the way a knight carries a blade not always drawn, but always ready. And when the next platter arrives, steaming and fragrant and shaped like a peacock wrapped in pastry, you pick up your knife, you smile, you take the first bite. Time has a peculiar weight when you're a food taster, not just in years or seasons, but in the way each hour after a meal becomes a waiting room for death. You chew, you swallow, and then you begin the real task, watching the clock without a clock. Every minute after the first bite becomes a measurement of survival. 5 minutes in, you're fine. Probably 15. You relax a little. 30, your shoulders drop. An hour, and you start convincing yourself it was safe. But then you remember not all poisons strike quickly. Some are patient. Some wait until you're asleep. Some work slowly, eroding the body over days, lulling their victim with silence before plunging them into chaos. And so, even when the food is warm and fragrant and the king is pleased, your job isn't done when the platter is cleared. It lingers. It breathes behind you. It hums in the walls of your gut and echoes in every gurgle of your stomach. You begin to interpret every sound and sensation as a message. Was that a normal cramp or something worse? Why does your mouth feel dry? Why is your throat scratchy today? The longer you live, the more you realize that survival isn't just a triumph. It's a trap. Because the next bite might still be your last. You become familiar with your own body in a way most people never are. You catalog its twitches, its patterns, its flutters and gurgles. You know the speed of your pulse at rest. You know the way your hands shake when you're hungry versus when you're afraid. You learn the difference between anxiety and symptoms. Mostly. But that's the cruelest trick of the job. Your mind can poison you just as efficiently as the cook. You've spent entire afternoons convinced that a single olive oil drizzle was laced with mercury, only to wake up the next morning completely fine, except for the exhaustion of surviving your own imagination. Other times, you feel completely normal until you collapse from something as stupid as undercooked eel. You once spent 3 days unable to see straight because of a spoiled almond cake. Not poisoned, just bad. But bad in a way that reminded you how thin the line is between edible and fatal. The cook apologized. The steward did not. You stop trusting your own senses after a while. Or rather, you begin to doubt whether your senses are yours at all. Are you tasting what's real, or what you fear? Is that bitterness truly in the sauce? Or just your tongue's paranoia staging a rebellion? You smell vinegar and immediately imagine stomach cramps. You sip wine and brace for vertigo. You develop phantom symptoms. One time, your fingers went numb for an hour after a meal of roasted turnips. You panicked, of course you did. You ran to the physician. He asked if you'd been resting your arm awkwardly. You had. He nodded, unimpressed. Poor circulation. He said, perhaps stand, occasionally. You left with a red face and the lingering shame of being mortal in front of someone who diagnoses by apathy. Waiting is its own kind of poison. It rots your nerves from the inside out. You sit quietly in your little chair after meals, not because you want to, but because tradition dictates you should. The king wants to see you calm, present, alive, a living symbol of safety. You become part of the decor, the gilded centerpiece of every banquet. You once tried to leave early. Before the king finished dessert, he noticed. Finished already, he asked, with the kind of soft danger that sits behind a silk curtain. You sat back down. You didn't move again until he did. And you learned a valuable lesson. Your job isn't just to taste. It's to endure, visibly. You also begin to notice that the waiting infects everyone else. Not just you. The steward watches you more intently now, especially during public feasts. He watches the way you breathe, the way you dab your lips with your napkin. You've started spacing your gestures out, deliberately take a bite. Wait, sip water, wipe your mouth, blink slowly. A performance of ease, a theater of health. If you rush, people worry. If you hesitate, they panic. Once, at a midsummer banquet, you sneezed after sampling the spiced wine. Just a sneeze. But the queen's hand froze halfway to her goblet. The room held its breath. You smiled, nodded, took another sip. She drank. Everyone exhaled. Later that night, alone in your quarters, you sat on your bed with your pulse racing, not because of poison, but because of the power you held, even without wanting it. It's strange to think about it that way, but it's true. You hold a power, not the kind that earns respect or coin or influence, but the power of signal, the power of reaction. You are the canary in the mine, the court's nervous system. The castle watches your skin for rashes, your lips for color, your hands for tremor. You've become a living barometer of fear. That has weight, that has consequence. You've seen entire trays sent back to the kitchen because you frowned slightly at a custard. You've heard whispers blaming you for the king's indigestion after you winced from a cramp. You've learned that the waiting period isn't just about you, it's about them, their comfort, their denial, their illusion that everything is safe as long as you're smiling. This waiting game extends into the nights. After the final course, when the fire's low and the hall is quiet, you lie in your cot, listening to your body. Every twinge is a trial. Every breath is an interrogation. You've grown hyper-attuned to your own digestion. You know the rhythms of your gut better than you know most courtier names. You time your dreams. You wake up from them if they twist too darkly. You once dreamt of drowning in stew. Woke up with your face damp and your hands clenched. Not sweat tears. You don't remember crying, but you believe it. Some nights you sit upright until dawn, waiting for the sickness that never comes. Then you put on your robe and start the day again. More tired, more suspicious, still alive. You've heard the word resilient tossed around. The steward said it once. You're resilient. That's rare in a taster. You didn't feel proud. You felt trapped, because resilience means you'll be asked to do it again and again until you're not. There's no retirement for tasters, no pension, no quiet exit. You either die, disappear, or get reassigned so far from food that people forget your name. You've known others who did this job, briefly, None lasted long. One simply left, walked out of the castle one morning and never came back. The guard said he went mad, took to the woods, muttering about worms in the water. Another choked on a bone. Not poisoned, just unlucky. Still, people whispered, perhaps he was silenced. You don't know. You don't ask. Every taster who leaves becomes a story. You pray not to become one yourself, and yet you keep going. You keep tasting. You keep waiting. Because not tasting is its own kind of treason. You once tried to refuse a pheasant. Just once. It had an odd glaze, and something in your gut screamed, no. You said you were unwell. The steward frowned. The dish was sent back. You thought you were safe. Then came the consequences. No one shouted. No one cursed. They simply reassigned your chamber to a colder room, took away your private washing basin. The next day's tray had double portions. You understood. A warning. You never refused again. The real poison, it turns out, isn't in the food. It's in the implications. So now, every bite you take, you measure not just for flavor or danger, but for time. How long will this one live inside you? How long until your body tells you whether it was safe? You've become a walking clock, ticking not in seconds, but in symptoms. Every swallow winds the spring tighter. Every burp is a whisper. Every cough is a question. You live on a countdown that resets 3 times a day, and somehow you haven't broken yet. You start to realize that digestion itself, something most people never think twice about, has become your public performance. It's not enough to survive the meal anymore. Now, you're expected to thrive afterward, visibly, like a living endorsement of every dish. The king watches your posture. The courtiers notice if your hand lingers on your stomach. Even the queen's lapdog, an ugly little creature with clouded eyes and a persistent wheeze, seems to grow alert when you cough into your sleeve. You can no longer trust the simple act of being human. Every burp draws a gaze. Every trip to the privy is noted. Once, after you excused yourself mid-feast, the steward personally followed you down the corridor, saying, just wanted to make sure you didn't faint in the hallway. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. You went back early and tasted the desserts twice. That night, you dreamed of melting into the floor like a sugar sculpture, no longer needing to explain why your stomach made such a sound. Because that's your new reality. Your insides are political. The royal digestive system is tethered, invisibly, to yours. And your gut doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the kingdom. The pressure to perform wellness after eating becomes its own ritual. You've developed a smile that says, I'm fine. And another that says, this is the best food I've ever had. And a third, more subtle one that says, yes, I'm very slightly dying, but please don't panic. You use that third one the most. You've learned to pause for breath exactly 2 seconds longer after chewing, to appear thoughtful rather than ill. You've trained your eyebrows not to furrow when something tastes off. You've practiced relaxing your jaw even when your teeth are clenched with unease. It's a performance so intricate, it feels choreographed. Sometimes you wonder if you should have joined the Traveling Actors Guild instead. At least their poison is metaphorical. And yes, it affects your digestion in actual ways. You've developed a permanent knot just beneath your ribs, a little bundle of tension that tightens whenever the king lifts his goblet. You're almost certain you've given yourself an ulcer from years of suppressing every reflex. The physician doesn't diagnose it. He says it's humoral imbalance, which is his way of blaming your emotions without admitting your job is killing you slowly. He prescribed boiled nettles and a week of dry bread. You followed the orders. You always do. But the knot remained. You've named it now. You call it loyalty. It seems fitting, since it's always with you and refuses to leave, no matter how much you plead. Your symptoms, real or imagined, have also become the talk of the court. You know this because you've heard your name mentioned in strange tones, usually when someone thinks you've stepped out of earshot. He looked pale today. He didn't finish the rabbit. Do you think he suspects something? You're not just watched, you're interpreted. Your every move is analyzed like scripture. You could burp and spark 3 conspiracy theories. You once scratched your arm during a feast and heard later that someone had reported you twitching uncontrollably. Another time, you spent a few extra seconds chewing a particularly dense tart, and the rumor circulated that you were unable to swallow due to paralysis. You've become a walking Rorschach test for the palace anxiety, and every shadow you cast becomes a headline in the whispered newsprint of the noble court. There's also the question of gas. No one ever talks about it, but you live with it every hour, because when you eat as much as you do, as cautiously and slowly and analytically as you do, things happen, sounds emerge, sensations, movements, and yet you're not allowed the natural consequence of digestion. You can't excuse yourself during a royal toast to attend to a bubble. You can't shift uncomfortably during the Duke's joke without raising eyebrows. You're expected to sit like a statue, noble in silence, while your intestines perform a symphony of suppressed discomfort. Once, you nearly fainted from holding in a belch that followed a particularly foamy ale. You swallowed it back down with such force that your ears popped. No one clapped, but they should have. It was your finest work of the evening. The absurd part is that none of this is actually about your health. No one truly cares if you're well. They care that you look well, that you don't spook the king, that you don't incite fear by vomiting into the rose bushes or fainting near the dessert table. You once saw a musician collapse mid-performance from exhaustion. The room went quiet, then resumed as if nothing had happened. But if you so much as hiccup too loudly, forks pause mid-air. Your job is to be well or to fake it flawlessly. You once joked with a kitchen boy that you should be knighted for services to stomach stability. He didn't laugh. He looked at you like you'd just predicted a death. You begin to hate your own body, not for failing you, but for threatening to, for being unpredictable, for demanding food when you're afraid to eat, for growling in ways you can't control. You start skipping meals on your own time. You nibble crusts and drink water. Anything more feels dangerous. You crave foods that won't betray you, boiled turnips, plain rice, steamed apples, anything with only one ingredient. The more complicated a dish, the less you trust it. You once got halfway through a braided pastry before realizing it had 6 fillings. You panicked, spit it into a cloth, and told the steward you'd already sampled it earlier. He didn't question it. He never does. But you felt the shame of waste, of cowardice, of the mounting fear that someday your hesitation might cost more than your dignity. It also seeps into your personal life, if you can call it that. You don't share meals with others. You don't linger at gatherings. You don't drink unless the king drinks first and visibly survives. Courting a joke. Who wants to kiss the mouth that tastes for death? You once thought about falling in love. There was a girl quiet, with ink-stained fingers and a soft voice. She brought you candied walnuts once, said she made them herself. You thanked her. Then you buried them in the garden behind the privy and didn't speak to her again. It wasn't about her. It was about the risk. Love is unpredictable. Food is already trying to kill you. You don't need romance joining in. And the longer this goes on, the more your digestion becomes public property. People begin asking you how you feel, not out of kindness, but out of calculation. Feeling steady today means, can I eat this swan with confidence? You look a bit flushed. Translates to, should I avoid the pears? Every conversation you have after a meal becomes a medical consultation. You're not even a person anymore. You're a digestive forecast, a human weather report for royal consumption. Today's taster presents with mild fatigue and slight pallor. Expect delays in wine service. Historians still argue whether tasters developed resistance over time, building up tolerances to certain poisons. You don't know about that. You've never intentionally repeated anything that made you sick, but you've developed something else, a numbness. A kind of detached awareness that lets you observe yourself from a distance. You chew while wondering what you look like. You swallow while assessing your breathing. You feel your body reacting like it belongs to someone else. Maybe that's the final stage of this job, not death, but disassociation. The ultimate side effect of becoming a tool, a system, a role. You're not the man who digests. You're the body that confirms whether others may, and still, you sit, you taste, you smile. You hide your cough behind a handkerchief. You press the cold water jug to your temple when no one's looking, and when the king pats his belly and says, well, that was safe enough. You nod. You agree, because digestion, in this place, is diplomacy. and your stomach is the battlefield on which alliances are sealed. Enemies are monitored, and fear is quietly, daily swallowed. There comes a point when you no longer believe in the possibility of refusal, not even for survival. You remember a time, vaguely, when saying no felt like a choice people could make. But here, within these stone walls, inside this ancient pageant of ceremony and consequence, refusal is its own kind of betrayal. You tasted a pheasant once that reeked of something wrong, too metallic, too slick. You hesitated, not visibly, just in the way your hand slowed for half a breath. The steward noticed. Of course he did. You tried to smooth it over with a nod, a polite smile, a small compliment about the seasoning, but it was too late. Later that night, you were summoned not to be punished, not openly, but to be spoken with. A quiet discussion, a cold room, just you and the steward and two unlit sconces. You hesitated. He said, "Why you gave your answer." Carefully crafted a bone splintered oddly. I feared it might pierce the king's tongue. It was half true, mostly false. He stared at you for a long time, then said, "Hesitation invites questions. Be more certain." And with that, you understood you may taste for poison, but your real duty is certainty. And certainty cannot afford discretion. From that day on, you stopped listening to your instincts as something sacred and began managing them like an unruly dog. You trained your reactions to be obedient. You swallowed not only food, but fear, doubt, suspicion. If the wine tasted off, you blamed the cask. If the stew stung your tongue, you smiled and said, "Lovely kick." You knew it was madness, but it was the kind of madness required of someone whose role depends on being publicly invulnerable. You're not allowed to flinch. You're not allowed to request a moment. You're not allowed to say, "This doesn't feel right," because the moment you do, the entire feast is tainted. Not just the food, but the mood, the narrative, the security of the court. And what are you, if not a bulwark for everyone else's comfort? You think of the time you said no. The only time. The pheasant was glazed with something too dark. The smell was faintly sour. Not rot, something chemical. Something foreign. You looked at the plate. You looked at the steward. You said, quietly, "I won't taste this." Silence fell like a guillotine. The room, already hushed with royal anticipation, became colder. The steward stared. The king raised an eyebrow. "You won't?" he asked, not angry, just amused. That made it worse. You shook your head. "It's not prepared properly." Another lie. A weak one, but a survivable one. The plate was removed. The king waved it away, more annoyed by delay than scandal. But afterward, the price came. Not immediately, not loudly, but it came. Your quarters were moved to a draftier hall. Your supper portions became smaller, the steward's glances sharper. Your name, once spoken with mild interest, became weighted with silent questions. That's the real punishment. Not lashings, not exile. Just the slow erosion of trust disguised as logistical shifts. You learned then that no is not a word the taster gets to use. Refusal is reserved for those with higher titles, thicker collars, names embroidered into records. You, though near the king's table, are not of it. You are furniture, serviceware. The spoon that flinches ruins the meal. So, you taste everything now. Even when your stomach turns. Even when your eyes water. Even when a voice inside you screams. Don't, because that voice, if heard by others, would cost you your seat, your roof, your name. Historians sometimes speculate about moments of protest in royal households, small gestures, subtle sabotage, silent resistance. But what they often miss is that survival, in certain places, looks exactly like obedience. And that obedience, over time, carves away the will to resist anything at all. After that incident, you developed a new habit. Every time you taste something questionable, be it strange in flavor or too familiar in its danger, you tell yourself a story, a small one. You imagine that you're not tasting for the king, but for a child you once knew, a neighbor's son, a cousin, maybe even your younger self, someone small, someone worth protecting. It sounds ridiculous, but it helps. It changes the taste from threat to duty, from torment to purpose. And in this job, a little fiction goes a long way. It helps you bite down. It helps you swallow. It helps you stay upright when your skin wants to crawl. You also learn how to recover, how to mask your instincts with performance. You've mastered the art of coughing politely into a napkin, of sneezing with grace, of shifting in your seat like you're adjusting posture, not bracing against nausea. You've learned to compliment a dish with a tone that convinces others, even when your mouth is watering from nerves and not hunger. Once, after a feast where you were almost certain the salad had been dusted with something bitter and wrong, you stood, lifted your goblet, and said, "To the freshness of the harvest." The king smiled. The court followed suit. No one noticed how tightly you gripped the stem of the cup. You vomited later, in private, not from poison, from pressure. And that's the thing most days. The food isn't even dangerous. Most days, it's perfectly fine. But it doesn't matter, because the fear doesn't care about actual threat. It lives in anticipation, in the shadow of possibility. You live on edge, not because you're constantly dying, but because you never know when you might. That uncertainty is the true poison. It slips into your bloodstream with every bite, every sip. It eats away at your certainty. It rots your sense of safety. It makes you jump at shadows and question your own memories. Was the pheasant really sour that day? Or were you just tired? Was the steward's tone sharper? Or did you imagine it? The worst part is the isolation. You can't talk about any of this. No one wants to hear it. The kitchen won't listen. They're too busy with orders. The steward won't listen. He thinks fear is part of your job description. The physician will listen, but only to diagnose, never to comfort. You're surrounded by people, and yet you're entirely alone. Your job depends on it. You must remain above suspicion, beneath concern, outside of friendship. You once tried to confide in the scullery maid. She listened. She nodded. She offered you a warm roll, said, "You're brave." Then she never spoke to you again. It wasn't cruelty. It was caution. Being close to the taster is dangerous. You are a man marked by proximity to death. No one wants to inherit that mark. So you keep your silence. You keep tasting. You keep performing. Because saying no, even once, taught you what it costs. Not just in comfort, in identity, in place. Saying no stripped you of something invisible, a trust you hadn't known you'd earned. And once it's gone, you realize how fragile your footing was. You don't dare risk it again. So the next time a dish smells strange, you take the bite. When a sauce tingles oddly on your lips, you swallow. When a wine tastes sharp in the throat, you sip again. And when the steward glances your way, you smile and nod. You're fine. Always fine. Because the truth is simple and brutal in the royal court. Survival is never loud. It doesn't roar. It doesn't rebel. It whispers. It waits. It obeys. And sometimes, it tastes what it shouldn't just to remain part of the meal. Every so often, a strange wind blows through the castle, one they call the Royal Progress. To the rest of the court, it's an adventure, a traveling show of velvet, banners, and ceremonial stops in cities and villages across the kingdom. To you, it's a logistical nightmare with a fork. The king doesn't stop eating just because the dining table is now carried by horse-drawn wagons and set up in strange halls that smell like straw, mold, or worse, fresh ambition. The Royal Progress means unfamiliar kitchens, unknown hands, and, most terrifying of all, food prepared by people trying too hard to impress. Local lords who see the king's visit as a chance to curry favor. Bakers who lace their pastries with spices they've never used before. Butchers who save their best, rid rarest, riskiest cuts of meat for the king's plate. You taste it all. In rooms where the torches sputter, the flagstones sweat, and the cooks smile too wide. Home may be dangerous, but at least danger there has a routine. Out here, every bite is a stranger. The first stop is a manor built into the side of a hill. Its kitchen staffed with freckled boys and a grandmother who claims she learned to cook from the old gods. You don't ask which gods. Her soup smells like tree bark and betrayal. You sample it anyway, because that's what you're here for. The meat is stringy, the broth sharp with some herb you can't name. You sip, you wait. 5 minutes, nothing. 10, still breathing. The king is served. He grunts approval. You exhale, but your stomach holds the memory for hours, twisting and turning long into the night, while you lie on a borrowed cot and wonder if there's a polite way to decline ancient forest stew next time. Royal progress means different beds every few days, different kitchens every few hours, and a rotating cast of trusted locals who all swear their food is the finest in the land. You develop a checklist in your mind. Is the cook sweating too much? Does the bread smell faintly of ash? Is the wine bottle unsealed before you arrive? You've learned to spot panic disguised as hospitality. The ones who talk too much, the ones who won't meet your eyes, the ones who serve pickled anything without being asked. You once tasted a herring that made your ears ring. The steward called it local flavor. You called it near death in a jar. There's a strange ceremony to how the townspeople react to you. They know who you are. Word spreads ahead of the procession. The royal taster, the man who eats first, dies first if the gods are cruel. Some look at you with admiration, as if you're a knight of the tongue. Others avoid you completely, like being seen in your company might invite misfortune. A child once handed you a plum on the roadside. His mother snatched it away before you could respond and whispered something in his ear about tempting fate. You laughed softly, but bitterly. You're not a celebrity. You're a symbol, and symbols don't get to eat plums for fun. The worst meals are the ones served with ceremony. The feast held in your honor, though, of course, it's always for the king. You sit at a long table beside lords and minor nobles, sampling cold venison, unfamiliar cheeses, and local pies that smell of strange fats and stranger fillings. A bard sings about the bravery of royal tasters. He rhymes tongue with young, and you smile politely while chewing a roll that may or may not contain crushed lavender. Everyone watches you. The steward, the host, the king. Even the servants lean in from the walls, just slightly, to see if your eye twitches. Your jaw tightens. Your breath stops. It's not that they want you to suffer. It's just that they need confirmation that they won't. You begin to miss the predictability of castle kitchens. At least there, the poisons had patterns. Here, it's chaos dressed in linen napkins. One town served a jelly made from pig's feet and mint. Another gave you a porridge with crunchy bits you chose not to investigate. One noble tried to serve a dish made with boar livers soaked in seawater and cured under the moon. You didn't know what that meant, and you didn't want to find out. You tasted it. Of course you did. Your jaw ached for days. But the king liked it, so the dish was declared a new tradition. You've eaten it twice since, and each time the moon seemed a little more suspicious. At night, after the plates are cleared and the court retires, you walk the outskirts of whatever estate or hall you've been assigned to. It's your only moment of solitude. You breathe in the cool air, hoping it clears the residue of the evening's feast. Your body feels foreign heavy, stretched thin by travel and anxiety. Your tongue feels raw from tasting too much. You try to tell yourself you're doing good work, that this is noble, that this is meaningful. But sometimes, all you can think about is how much you miss the bland porridge from back home. At least porridge doesn't pretend to be anything other than survival. One night, deep in the countryside, you're served roasted goose stuffed with apricots and regional herbs. The herbs turn your mouth slightly numb. You pause just for a second, but the steward notices. His eyes narrow. You nod quickly, pretend to chew thoughtfully, make a noise that could be mistaken for approval. The king is served. He eats. He smiles. Crisis averted. But hours later, you wake up sweating, your heartbeat erratic. You sit upright, gasping. No rash, no fever, just fear. You sip water, press a damp cloth to your forehead, and lie back down, waiting for something worse. It never comes. Just shadows and your imagination, doing their usual nightly dance. You keep a small pouch of safe food in your travel satchel now. Dried apple slices, hard bread, a sliver of salted cheese. It's not allowed, strictly speaking, but it's a small act of control in a world that gives you none. You don't eat from it unless you're desperate, but knowing it's there helps. You think of it as your lifeline, a rope tied to a version of yourself that still believes in trust. At one manor, a particularly enthusiastic lord insists on showing you his wine cellar before dinner. You'll find none better in the kingdom. He boasts, pulling corks with the fervor of a priest performing sacraments. The bottles are dusty, their labels faded. He pours a dark red into a crystal glass, hands it to you with both palms. You sniff, you sip, you smile, but it's too sweet. Cloying, you feel something tighten behind your eyes. Is it just the travel or the wine? You nod again, louder this time, and say, exquisite. You drink it all. The Lord beams. The king drinks next. You hold your breath for the next hour. Nothing happens. But that night, your dreams are filled with dark stains and laughing corks. The royal progress drags on, week after week, town after town, kitchen after kitchen. You stop counting the meals. You stop trying to guess what's safe. You taste, you wait, you move on. Your body becomes a vessel for worry. Your smile becomes a mask forged from repetition. You learn the names of herbs you never wanted to know. You startle at every new sauce. You flinch at every unfamiliar spice, but you never hesitate. Not anymore. Because out here, the king's confidence is as fragile as the crust on a burnt tart. One mistake, one delay, one false move, and the entire court begins to unravel. You are the hinge that holds it steady, the mouth that says, yes, this is safe, the body that confirms it by surviving. And so, you endure, you chew, you swallow, you nod, even when your gut churns, even when your tongue burns, even when your thoughts scream that something is wrong. You do the one thing you've learned better than anyone else. You stay alive. You start to realize, with the quiet horror of someone watching a ship sink from the inside, that religion is no comfort to you anymore. You used to pray, before meals, after meals, during long nights when your stomach gurgled and your lips tingled, and you weren't sure if it was spice or death. You'd whisper to saints you didn't remember the names of. You'd mutter oaths to the old gods when the new ones stayed silent. You even lit candles once, a line of them, stolen from the chapel, lined across your windowsill like a trembling procession of hope. But over time, the prayers began to feel hollow, not because they went unanswered, but because they felt misplaced. You weren't asking for mercy anymore. You were bargaining. Let me survive this one. You'd think, and I'll do something good. I'll confess, I'll give thanks. But you never followed through, because every morning you woke up still breathing. The only thing you truly felt was relief, and guilt, and hunger. They assign you a monk during the Lenten season, some performative gesture of piety from the crown. He follows you like a shadow, hood always up, whispering blessings over your shoulder while you eat. It's meant to be comforting. It isn't. He smells like parchment and moldy cheese. He says things like, "The Lord watches all who taste in service of the righteous." You nod. You keep chewing. He doesn't understand. He can't. You once asked him what the church says about poison. He answered, without hesitation, "It is a weapon of the weak, wielded against divine order." You asked, "What if the divine order tastes it first?" He didn't respond, just made the sign of the cross and told you to fast more. You were already fasting, not by faith, by necessity. During these holy months, the menus change. Less meat, more grains, more fish, simpler sauces, fewer spices, theoretically safer, but only theoretically. Rot doesn't care for holy calendars. One Lent, a trout dish nearly did you in. The fish looked perfect golden, crisp, aromatic. You took the bite. Within minutes, your stomach folded like damp linen. The world tilted. The steward raised an eyebrow. You smiled, sweating. The monk muttered something about martyrdom. You clenched your fists and focused on your breathing. That night, you purged so violently you saw stars. The physician said it was not poison, just improper storage, as if that made it better. The monk suggested prayer. You suggested refrigeration. Neither solution came. You developed your own rituals instead. Tiny acts of warding. You tap your fork twice before each bite. You always take the first sip of wine with your left hand. You never eat from the edge of the plate. You wear a small coin inside your boot, rubbed smooth by nervous fingers over the years. Not because you think it protects you, but because you need something that feels like protection. The monk sees this once and asks, "Is that a talisman you say?" "No," he says. "It should be prayer, not objects, that guard your life." You look at him, the man who eats only barley and walks like a specter, and you think, maybe you've never needed guarding, but you don't say it. You just nod and tap the fork twice. Rotten cheese becomes a surprising enemy, not the hard, proud wheels that smell of strength and cellar stone, but the soft ones, the ones with veins like bruises. They're often brought out during fasts, dressed with honey or paired with dry bread. You taste them all. You smile when the mold tickles the roof of your mouth. You nod when the steward asks, "Too strong." The truth is, you can't tell anymore. Where mold ends and danger begins has blurred. Historians still argue about what medieval people considered edible. Fermented and spoiled weren't separate categories, they were a spectrum. One you now live on, day after day, unsure whether the creamy bite you just took is a delicacy or a eulogy. Your appetite becomes warped by all this. You no longer crave food. You crave simplicity. A boiled root, a piece of dry toast, a dish with 3 ingredients or fewer. You dream of meals that don't require guessing. Once, during a festival in a remote village, you were served a stew made entirely of turnips. No meat, no spice, just turnips. The cook apologized profusely. You almost cried with gratitude. The monk said it was a fitting dish for humility. You wanted to hug him. You didn't, but for the first time, his presence didn't make your shoulders tighten. The religious ceremonies that accompany meals during progress are equally exhausting. Priests reciting blessings over the bread, choir boys singing psalms while you chew, incense burning so thick it makes the wine taste like ashes. It's all theater. It has nothing to do with health. It's not about the food, it's about appearances, about piety, about pageantry. You sit through it all, stomach clenched, trying not to gag on overly blessed goose. You once asked the monk if prayer could purify spoiled butter. He said, "The soul. Yes. The body. No." You appreciated the honesty. For once. There's also the quiet shame of eating during religious fasts while others go without. The court might pretend to abstain, but the king never truly fasts, which means neither do you. You taste everything, even on Good Friday, even on the eve of the saint's feast. The monk disapproves. He never says it, but you can feel it, in his long silences, in the way he bows his head when you lift your spoon. He once asked, "Do you feel guilt, knowing others starve while you dine daily?" You said, "I don't dine. I detect." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The judgment in his eyes was enough. But what he doesn't understand, what none of them understand, is that every bite you take is more penance than privilege. You eat because someone must, not because you want to. You taste, not to indulge, but to intercept. You are the sin eater of fear, the vessel of risk. And while others fast for their souls, you fast in your heart, longing for a day when a meal doesn't feel like confession, when you're not both the sinner and the sacrificed. You start to lose track of what food is supposed to be. Nourishment, celebration, community. All those meanings have slipped away. Food is a function now, a ritual, a trial. You miss hunger, real hunger, not the dull, permanent ache of anxiety, but true hunger, the kind that makes stew smell divine and bread feel like a miracle. You miss trust, the simple act of biting into an apple without examining it for punctures or bruises or gloss that looks a little too polished. The monk says, "To eat without question is to honor providence." You think, to eat without question is to die in a crown's name. You don't say that aloud. You just nod. Again. You find yourself envying the monk, absurdly. Not for his robes or his prayers or his smug, untouched belly, but for his certainty. He believes in God, in ritual, in something bigger than himself. You once believed, too, in the system, in your duty. maybe even in grace. But now, you believe only in observation, in muscle memory, in the quiet ticking of your heart after each meal. You don't know if that makes you broken. You don't even care. Survival has burned away the need for faith and replaced it with precision. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the fires are out and the air is cold and your belly is strangely calm, you find yourself praying again, not to be spared, not to be blessed, but to be forgotten, to slip into a silence where your name is not whispered in kitchens, where no eyes watch your hands lift the spoon, where the king's safety doesn't ride the curve of your spine, a silence where you are no longer the taster, just a man, hungry, human, undisturbed. You get an apprentice one morning without warning, no ceremony, no permission asked. He just shows up beside your stool near the scullery, clutching a satchel and grinning as if he's won a prize. "I'm to learn from you," he says, voice full of foolish pride, like this is a real trade, like you're a blacksmith or a map maker. You stare at him, stunned into silence. He's young, 17, maybe, barely a man. No scars on his knuckles, no exhaustion in his eyes. His tunic still smells like fresh soap. You want to say, "Leave now. Walk away. This job doesn't teach it steals." But instead, you nod, because saying anything else might invite suspicion. You don't know whose idea it was to assign him to you, but you know how this ends. With someone younger trying to smile through nausea, someone braver than he should be, pretending he doesn't feel the dread yet. You've seen it before. You will see it again. And now, for some cursed reason, you are the one expected to pass down what cannot be taught. The first thing you notice is that he likes mushrooms, as in, really likes them, talks about them, picks them out from mixed dishes, and identifies them by name. That's a chanterelle, he says brightly over lunch one day. Golden, earthy, almost sweet if roasted. You blink. You want to scream. You want to shake him and shout. Do you know how many poisons hide behind mushrooms' faces? Do you know how many tasters have died thinking they were eating chanterelles? But you don't. You say, "Good. Keep tasting." Because you know fear will find him eventually. It always does. It just waits until he's alone, stomach twisting, questioning whether that last mouthful was just a bit too smooth. He asks questions relentlessly, eagerly. Do you smell every dish? Do you ever fake it? Have you ever actually been poisoned? What's the worst thing you ever tasted? You give short answers, vague ones, not because you're cruel, but because there's no way to explain the 1,000 tiny deaths your tongue has already rehearsed. He deserves to be spared for as long as possible. Still, one day, over a tray of suspiciously clear aspic, he leans in and whispers, "I think this job is a kind of honor, don't you?" You look at him, really look, and something inside you sinks. He believes it, not because he's stupid, but because he hasn't learned yet that honor in this court is just another name for usefulness. He still thinks survival is something you earn with courage and discipline. You almost envy him. The steward treats him with that cautious politeness reserved for new tools, not yet valuable, but possibly useful. The cooks like him more than they like you. He smiles more. He jokes. He compliments the food. The first time he tastes something before you, your stomach knots not out of jealousy, but dread. You watch his face. You search for a twitch, a tremble, a wrong breath. Nothing. He passes the test. The king eats. The room moves on. But you don't. You sit with the memory of him lifting that spoon first, and for a moment, you feel like a ghost watching your own past, replayed by someone who doesn't know the ending yet. You try to teach him the little things, how to identify the metallic tang of a poorly cleaned goblet, how to spot wine that's been tampered with by the way it clings too long to the rim, how to judge a custard not just by color, but by the way it sets under a spoon. But these things aren't enough. They're details, surface rules. The truth is, the real knowledge is unteachable. How do you explain the moment just before you taste, when your body pulls away and your duty shoves it forward? How do you describe the cold that settles behind your eyes when your tongue goes numb and you smile anyway? He asks you once, how do you know if it's working? You say, "You don't," and you leave it at that. Then comes the day he gets sick. Not seriously, just a dizzy spell. Too much sweet sauce at once. Maybe too little sleep. You find him slumped on a stool, pale and shaking. The steward frowns. The physician is summoned. The king is not yet seated. You are handed the tray and told, without words, to continue. You taste everything. You swallow. You wait. You nod. The meal proceeds. But your thoughts stay on the boy. Later, you visit him. He's in the laundry room, wrapped in damp cloths. He smiles weakly. Just nerves. "I think," he says. You don't argue. You just hand him a piece of dry bread and say, "Eat it slowly." In your mind, you're already rehearsing his eulogy. He recovers. Of course he does. They always do at first. But something changes in him. He's quieter now. He frowns more. He hesitates before chewing. He looks to you more often. The smile, when it comes, is less convincing. You've seen it happen a dozen times. The honeymoon ends. The dread moves in. You wonder how long he'll last. He's clever, alert, but still soft. You give him simpler portions when you can. You let him taste the bread, the fruit, the wine. You take the sauces, the pies, the gifts from foreign guests. You shoulder the things that hide secrets. One day, during a feast for a northern duke, a dish arrives late, duck in red wine reduction. The cook is unfamiliar. The boy looks at you. You look at the duck. You take the first bite. He watches. You chew. You swallow. You smile. Later that night, as you lie awake, waiting for your stomach to make up its mind, he knocks softly at your door. You open it. He holds a bottle of ginger water and says, "In case." You take it. He doesn't leave. "Do you ever wish you'd never started?" he asks. You want to lie. You want to say it's worth it, that the king's life matters, that someone has to do it. But you look at him and you say, "Every day." He nods, then leaves. The next week, he doesn't show up. Not at breakfast, not at lunch. You ask the steward. He says, "Reassigned." No explanation, no detail, just gone. Vanished like so many before. You check the lower halls, the laundry, the kennels. No one has seen him. No one even remembers his name. That's how it works. The tasters are ghosts before they're even gone. You return to your post, alone, again. The plate is waiting. The wine, the fruit, the sauces, all of it, quietly daring you to notice something is wrong. You lift your spoon. You eat. You nod. The day continues. But something in you does not. Something stays back in that quiet moment when he handed you the ginger water. When his face still held a flicker of belief that the world made sense, you carry that with you now. A small ghost, a new layer of caution, a reminder that you are not a mentor. You are a warning sign written too late. The king begins to look at you differently. It's not immediate, not dramatic, but it's there. A longer glance held just a breath past comfort. A pause before lifting his fork, waiting to see if you hesitate. You recognize the signs. They're not new. You've seen them before in noblemen who lost trust in their horses, in generals who second-guessed their maps, in courtiers who started sleeping with daggers under their pillows. The king, it seems, is beginning to suspect you. Not overtly, not yet, but enough that every time you enter the room, the silence wraps a little tighter around your neck, enough that the steward's questions sharpen. "You're well today." You didn't notice anything strange in the wine. You're certain the apples weren't overripe. The words are harmless, spoken lightly, but their rhythm is wrong. They land like stones wrapped in silk, and you understand, deep in your bones, what's happening. Suspicion has turned inward, and you're standing in its path. It begins with a simple moment, a pear, sliced perfectly, arranged like petals, dusted with cinnamon. You taste it, you wait, you smile, but the king eats slowly. He chews deliberately. His eyes stay on you the entire time, not in admiration, in calculation, as though he's watching for the flicker behind your smile. For the twitch of a lie, he finishes the pear, he dabs his lips, he says, "Sweet, too sweet." You nod. It's the spice. You offer, as neutral as breathing. He says nothing, but his gaze lingers. That night, the pears are replaced with plums. No one says why. The cook is not seen again. You begin sleeping with a knife under your bed, not because you think someone will attack you, but because you need something solid to hold when your hands won't stop shaking. Days pass. The air thickens. The court becomes colder, not in temperature, but in tone. Conversations hush when you approach. You catch glances exchanged behind goblets. Your seat is moved slightly further from the king. You're not dismissed. You're not confronted. That would be too loud. Too final. No, this is worse. You're being unspoken. Untrusted. You begin to understand what it means to be expendable in a job that depends on visibility. If you can't be trusted to taste, then what are you? Just a mouth. Just a risk. Just a man whose purpose has expired. And still, you taste. Every day. Every meal. Because the alternative is silence. And silence, in this castle, is not peace. It's preparation. There is no single incident, no dramatic accusation, just a slow erosion, a withering. The steward begins assigning others to taste with you. A wine bearer, a second taster. Redundancy. He calls it precaution. But you know what it is. It's a vote of no confidence in your own blood. You taste first. They follow. You watch their faces like you used to watch your own reflection, waiting, wondering. And when nothing happens, the court relaxes but never toward you. You are still the uncertain one, the body that perhaps got too comfortable, too familiar, too close. The king never speaks of it, but his silence has weight now. It drapes over you at every meal, a silent dare. You consider leaving, truly. You pack a bag one night, nothing grand, just a satchel, a loaf of bread, some dried fish, a spare tunic. You sit on your cot and stare at the door for what feels like hours. Freedom is right there, just steps away. But you don't move, because you know the truth leaving would not be escape. It would be admission, and admission is guilt. And guilt, in the absence of proof, is enough for a shallow grave. So you unpack. You eat the bread. You go back to work the next morning like nothing's changed. Because that's how survival works now, not in escape, but in endurance. Then one evening, the king speaks to you directly. A private meal. Just him and his advisor and you. The others have left. The hall is quiet. The fire burns low. He finishes a leg of lamb, wipes his fingers, and says, "You've lasted longer than most." It's not a compliment. It's a statement. You nod. "Luck," you say. He raises a brow. Luck runs out. You nod again. He looks away. "Tell me," he says, "if someone were to poison me, what would they use?" You freeze. Not externally. Externally. You keep your face even. But your thoughts scramble. Is this a test a trap? Or something worse, a confession in disguise? You speak carefully. Depends on the message they want to send. The king smiles faintly, a twitch at the edge of his mouth, and if the message was subtle, he asks. A slow rot. You meet his eyes. Then they'd use trust. Slowly, quietly. He says nothing more. The next course is served. After that night, things get stranger. Your clothes are laundered with less care. Your water tastes off. Your food portions shrink. The physician visits you unannounced, asks about your dreams, your bowel movements, your sleep. He checks your eyes for clarity. He smells your breath. He touches your pulse. You ask, "Is there concern?" He shrugs. Just routine. But you see the shift. The court has turned. You are no longer just the canary. You are the mine, the source of unease, the embodiment of risk. And once that label sticks, it does not wash off. You taste more carefully now, not just for poison, but for punishment, for tricks, for messages. You check the cutlery, you sniff the plates, you eat with the precision of a surgeon performing his own autopsy. And still, you smile. because to frown would be to confirm suspicion, and suspicion is already a fire catching in dry brush. The king's smile comes less often. The steward's instructions grow colder. You are alone again, but this time, not because of duty, because of doubt. And the worst part, you don't even blame them, because you know how this looks. You have lasted too long. You do seem too calm. You have grown too good at pretending. You are, in some strange way, the perfect villain, the man with access, the man with insight, the man who could, if he chose, end it all with one wrong bite. And so you are feared not for what you've done, but for what you might. The king doesn't need a guilty man. He needs a convenient one, and you are perfectly positioned. So now you rehearse your movements. You choreograph each meal. You breathe evenly. You compliment dishes twice. You laugh at jokes. You drink first. Eat first. Wipe your lips first. You pretend not to notice when the guards shift their stance. When the steward's quill pauses mid-note as you chew, you make yourself smaller, softer. You dim your presence, hoping they forget you before they replace you. Because that's all you want now, not redemption, not restoration, just time. Just a little more time. You think, sometimes, of the cook you liked, the one who gave you a sliver of burnt bread because he said it tastes like home. He disappeared 2 winters ago. No reason given. No body found. You remember the look on his face when he handed you that crust, tired, kind, resigned. You wonder if you wear the same look now. You think you do. At night, you sleep in spurts. You wake to creaks, to shadows, to silence that feels too perfect. You don't light a candle. You don't cry out. You just lie there, eyes open, listening to the castle breathe, waiting, always waiting. And when morning comes, you dress, you sit, you lift your spoon, you eat. Because that is what you do. Because the king is watching. Because suspicion, once it begins, does not end it, only quiets, coiled like a snake behind the throne. You fantasize about retirement in the way starving men dream of feasts, not because you believe it's coming, but because imagining it is the only comfort that doesn't rot in your hands. It's never spoken of aloud. Of course, no one retires from your position. They either die quietly or vanish with a neatly worded explanation from the steward reassigned, relocated, repurposed. But in your mind, you've crafted the exit 1,000 ways. Sometimes you become a shoemaker in a coastal village, hands finally doing something that doesn't involve trembling over a fork. Other times you raise goats in the hills, live on milk and roots, watch the sun set without wondering if you'll wake up. In the most indulgent version, you do nothing at all, just sit in a chair in the middle of a field, letting the wind carry the scent of earth instead of gravy and fear. You think of these futures not because you expect them, but because your present offers no room to breathe. You cling to the illusion of escape like a child clutches the edge of a dream long after waking. It's irrational, maybe, but it's all you have. Even the idea of not eating fills you with a strange joy. You imagine going a whole day without tasting anything, without swallowing the uncertainty of 1,000 unseen hands. It's not that you don't like food anymore. It's that food no longer means nourishment. It means submission, risk, performance. You envy the beggars in the market stalls who eat with dirty fingers and don't pause before every bite. You even envy the monks with their dry loaves and holy fasting. At least they get to be hungry on purpose. Your hunger is always reactive, shaped by fear and regulation. There is no appetite here, only protocol. And when you do feel it gnawing, genuine hunger, it terrifies you, because hunger makes you impulsive. Hunger dulls your senses. Hunger makes you forget to check for bitterness, for chalky textures, for smells that don't belong. Hunger is dangerous in your world. And if retirement were ever offered, truly offered, you wonder what price it would come with. Would they let you live freely? Would they let you take anything with you? A pension, a name, a reputation? Or would they just send you away with a horse and a bag of silence, ensuring you vanish before you can speak too much of the kitchens, the politics, the faces you've seen blanch and tremble before the king took his first bite? Because that's the other truth, your memories are dangerous. You've seen too much. Not just food, power, paranoia. You know who sits close to the king and why. You know who sends back dishes uneaten and who gets larger portions. You've seen nobles pass coated glances over soup, and enemies seated beside one another, with knives too close at hand. You've heard whispers in the hallway that weren't meant for you, and learned to forget them before they reached your core, or at least, to pretend you did. They say knowledge is power, but in your case, knowledge is suspicion. You've carried it carefully, never speaking more than necessary, always bowing just low enough, never asking questions. Still, you suspect that's part of why the walls feel narrower now. The court doesn't like tools that think. A taster is meant to absorb, not observe, meant to detect flavor, not betrayal. And you've never said a word, never passed a warning, never scribbled a note. But still, the knowledge sits behind your eyes, and that alone makes you inconvenient. If they let you go, it would be with eyes on your back and a man already paid to ensure your silence becomes permanent. You once tried to hint at retirement to the steward, cloaked in a joke. If I last another year, perhaps I'll request a vineyard. He didn't laugh. He looked at you like you'd grown another head. No one retires from tasting, he said. You know that. He wasn't threatening you. He was reminding you. You nodded. You did know. But something about hearing it aloud locked the coffin of that dream a little tighter. You didn't mention it again, and yet you've kept small pieces of the future hidden away. Not much. A strip of soft cloth from your mother's apron, still faintly scented. A smooth stone from the river behind the monastery, where you were first brought for training. One page from an old book about gardens illustrated, the kind with colorful herbs and vines. You keep these tucked behind a loose brick near your sleeping quarters. They're useless, of course, but they're yours. When everything else has been tasted, when every part of your day is owned by someone else's hunger, even the smallest thing untouched becomes a treasure. You've never shown them to anyone. You never will. You once saw a man who did retire, or at least he claimed to. He came to the castle one winter to beg an audience said he'd been the king's taster under his grandfather. No one recognized him. The guards laughed. They didn't let him through. He stood at the gates with a limp and a blind eye, holding out a medallion that might have been real once. I kept him alive for 10 years, he shouted. No one listened. You stood at a window above, watching. He never looked up. You wanted to go down, to ask him his name, to hear his story, but you didn't, because you knew if you did, the court would notice, and they would wonder why. So you stayed where you were, behind glass, while the old man was turned away. You never saw him again. If you could retire truly, you imagine your senses might finally soften. Right now, they're too sharp. Every clink of cutlery startles you. Every scent of clove or vinegar raises alarms. Every silence feels loaded. You dream of dullness, of eating without interpreting, of walking through a market and smelling onions, and only thinking onions, not masking agents, spoilage covers, stomach irritants. You wonder if the body ever forgets, or if you'd spend your twilight years flinching at soup and poking at pears with suspicion. You'd like to think healing is possible, but you don't believe in that anymore. Not really. The job rewires you, and what's rewired doesn't easily revert. You used to write just little things, descriptions of food, poetry about taste. You burned most of them after a steward found a page left near your bed and asked if it was a code. It wasn't, but explaining metaphor to men who live in service to power is like offering wine to a drowning man. Now, you write in your head, quiet lines, recited in rhythm with your footsteps. A peach is a gamble. A plum is a lie. The stew might love you, or it might say goodbye. It's silly. It helps. Sometimes, the only thing separating your breath from a scream is a rhyme. The castle hosts a feast next week in honor of a foreign delegation. You've already seen the menu: exotic meats, rare spices, wine so old they'll need to be poured through silk. You'll taste it all. Of course you will. And you'll survive it. Probably. But you've already planned what you'll wear that day. The clean robe, the coin in your boot, the ribbon from your mother's apron tied around your wrist beneath the sleeve. Not as armor, as witness. You may not get a vineyard. You may not get goats. But if you do fall, you want to go down remembering something that wasn't served on a silver tray. And if, by some twist of fate, you do survive long enough to be replaced, to be forgotten, to disappear into the outskirts of memory, you'll go to the coast. You've decided you'll rent a room with peeling paint and a crooked window. You'll eat when you're hungry. You'll cook with your own hands. And maybe, just maybe, you'll taste something one day and not think of death at all. But for now, you set the satchel back under your bed. You run your hand over the brick. You breathe. And then you go to breakfast. The feast begins like they all do. Too many candles. Too much perfume. Too many voices pretending not to shout over one another. You've stood at this exact place before, just to the left of the dais, slightly behind the steward's elbow, close enough to see the king's fork, but far enough to not be noticed until your mouth opens. This time, though, something feels misaligned. The music starts late. The roast arrives too early. The king seems unusually tense, tapping his fingers against the goblet instead of holding it, and the guests foreign, richly dressed, smelling of spices not native to this land, smile too deliberately, their laughter too synchronized. You clock these things not because you're paranoid, but because your body knows the rhythm of safety. And this is not it. You haven't even tasted the soup, and already you're sweating. The first course is deceptively simple honey-glazed quail, served cold, nestled on a bed of bitter greens. You taste at first the greens, then a small corner of the bird. Your tongue pauses, not from fear, but familiarity. The glaze contains something you remember from years ago. Clove, yes, but sharpened. Not quite spoiled, not quite off. You smile, nod, and swallow. The king follows suit. You wait for the ripple of relief that usually moves through the table after the first bite. It doesn't come. People keep glancing at each other. Too many forks pause mid-air. A violin string breaks mid-song. Small things. But in your line of work, small things speak the loudest. The second course arrives a stew, thick and dark, served in wide bowls rimmed with gold. The servant presenting it has new shoes. That's odd. New shoes mean status, promotion, visibility. But you don't recognize him. You watch him closely. He places the bowl with both hands, steps back with trained precision, and disappears behind the curtains. You don't like it. You glance at the steward. He nods. You lower your spoon and begin to taste. The stew is fine, rich, earthy, with a bite of something like juniper. But then it lingers too long. You hold it in your mouth. You force your tongue to move. Not because it tastes wrong, because it tastes intentional. Like someone built this flavor not to please, but to mask. You swallow. The table watches. You smile. Then, for the first time in years, you feel a flicker, a sensation behind your eyes, a heat in your throat, not burning more, like blooming. Slowly, the way fever sneaks up on the arrogant. You close your eyes for half a breath. You open them, still here, still upright. You nod again. But the world feels a little tilted now. The third course arrives, fig stuffed with cheese and drizzled with vinegar reduction. Safe, theoretically. Sweet and tart and familiar. You take a bite. The cheese is soft, too soft, almost runny. You remember the boy, the apprentice, telling you once about runny cheese being a danger sign. You dismissed it back then. You wish you hadn't. Still, you chew and smile. You think you smile. The king begins to cough. Just once. Nothing dramatic. He raises his napkin, dabs his lips. The steward stiffens. The court pretends not to notice. You remain still. Because if you react now, you confirm something no one wants confirmed. The fourth course arrives before the plates are cleared. Sorbet. Bright red, piled high in crystal bowls. A palate cleanser. An apology in frozen form. You know what this is, a stall. Someone behind the curtain is scrambling. You taste the sorbet. It's tart, lemony, possibly laced with pomegranate, refreshing, a reset, and yet your stomach doesn't feel reset. It feels aware, alert. You sit very still. The king whispers something to the steward. The steward leans down, nods once, and does not return to his usual stance. You've seen that posture before, right before firings, executions, purges. You glance down. Your hand trembles just once. You hold the spoon tighter. Then comes the fifth course. The centerpiece, a boar's head, roasted and decorated with rosemary, figs, and tiny apples. A showpiece more than a meal. But they serve it anyway. Thick slices, glistening with glaze, are laid onto golden plates. You're handed yours first. Of course, the glaze again, something spicy, something slightly metallic. You breathe in, you taste. The flavor hits fast, hard, sweet and sharp at once. Your mouth floods with it. Your brain scrambles. Is it off? Or just exotic? Was the glaze prepared too long? Or infused with something ancient? You chew, you swallow, you breathe. Then something shifts. Not the taste, not the room. You, a single, precise pulse moves through your gut. Not pain, exactly. Not yet. But a signal. A knock at a door deep inside. You know what it means. You've waited your whole life for this feeling. You've trained to recognize it. And it's here. You remain still. You nod. You do not speak. Because the moment you say poison, the court erupts. Because panic spreads faster than any toxin. Because if you're wrong, you die anyway. And if you're right, you still might. You keep your face still. The king watches you. The steward watches the king. The guards watch the steward. And somewhere, someone in this room is waiting to see if you fall. You breathe. You smile. You touch your stomach beneath the table, lightly. The pulse returns. Stronger. You feel your throat dry. You lift the goblet. You sip water. You set it down. Then you make a choice. You stand. Just slightly. Just enough for the king to see. And then you lean in, as if to whisper. The steward flinches. But you don't speak to him. You speak to the king. Only 2 words too much. He pauses. He blinks. He nods. And then he pushes the plate aside. Nothing more. No alarm. No shout. No accusation. The court continues. The music resumes. The next course arrives. You sit back down. You breathe. Later, much later, as the candles burn low and the nobles stumble to their chambers, you slip away, down the back stairs, past the guards who no longer look at you, into the corridor behind the kitchens. You move like smoke, like a man fading. You reach your cot, you lie down, you wait, and the pain begins. Not agony, not instant, but steady, a tightening, a heat. You close your eyes. You let it come, because this was always the way, because you knew, because someone had to taste it, because you did your job. The king lived. You might not, but for tonight, you're still breathing. And in your world, that is the closest thing to a victory. The pain doesn't scream, it hums, low and even, like a bow drawn slowly across the belly of a cello, deep and resonant and impossible to ignore. You lie there, hands at your sides, fingers curling in rhythm with each new ripple. It starts in the gut, as you expected, but it travels oddly upward through your ribs, behind your eyes, then down again like a tide that never turns back. You don't cry out, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you've trained not to. Every instinct drilled into you from those early days when you were first told, if you react, they panic. If they panic, people die. So you lie still, the room spinning gently, the ceiling above you melting into a blur. The torchlight through the cracks in the door seems too bright, too yellow, as though you're seeing it through gauze soaked in oil. And all you can do is wait, not to die, but to know. Will it pass, or will it dig in and stay, burrowing deeper until something finally gives way? At some point, the physician arrives. You hear the soft creak of the door, the deliberate hush of steps on stone. He doesn't say your name. He never does. Just lifts your wrist, measures your pulse, opens one eye with a finger, sniffs your breath. The same ritual as always, but slower now, more careful. He doesn't ask what you ate. He already knows. He doesn't ask how you feel. That's not his job. His job is to calculate odds. After a moment, he stands. We'll watch you through the night, he says, as though you weren't already a watched thing, as though this isn't what you were born to become, a canary in a velvet cage, singing even when its throat burns. He leaves. You don't know if that comforts you. You drift. Time becomes unreliable. Moments stretch, collapse, reform. You remember things you hadn't meant to your mother's voice when you were small, telling you not to chew too fast, the first time you tasted wine, the night the old taster before you slipped in the bath and cracked his skull, or so they said, the stew with too much bay leaf that gave everyone diarrhea for 3 days, the king laughing at your joke, the king not laughing at your joke, the way the court froze when the ambassador from Navarre refused to eat unless you did first. All of it comes back now, not as memories, but as fragments, tastes, smells, half-spoken words hanging in midair. Sometime before dawn, the pain recedes, not completely, but enough. Enough that you can sit up, enough that you can sip the cool water left beside your bed without retching. Your hands still shake, your mouth is dry, but you are impossibly alive. And you know what that means. It means someone somewhere made a mistake. It means the dose was wrong, or the agent was delayed, or the glaze didn't hold. It means the poisoner failed, and you, their proof of failure, have now become something else entirely, a witness. You don't report it, not yet. You let the silence stretch. The court will wake soon, begin its daily grind. Breakfast will be served. The king will eat. The kitchen will clatter. Life will pretend to continue. But something has shifted. You feel it like a pressure drop before a storm. You are no longer a pawn. You are a liability, because you know. And knowing is the most dangerous thing of all. The steward appears at midday. Not in your quarters, no. That would be too intimate. He finds you in the herb garden, where you've gone to clear your head, to smell something that hasn't been cooked, diced, or steeped in suspicion. He doesn't sit. He doesn't smile. He simply says, "The king was pleased with your performance last night." You nod. "I didn't perform," you say. He blinks. "Exactly." Then he adds, as if discussing the weather, "We'll be reviewing kitchen staff this week." You understand what that means. People will vanish. Not all guilty. Some just unfortunate. Some just in the wrong place with the wrong spice in their apron pocket. You say nothing. He says nothing. Then he turns and walks away. You stand there a long while after he's gone, watching bees drift lazily between lavender stems, listening to the wind shuffle through mint leaves, and you realize something. You don't feel relief. You feel tired. Tired in a way no sleep can fix, because now you know the cycle doesn't end. It just resets. The poison isn't always in the food. Sometimes it's in the fear, the suspicion, the weight of always watching, always wondering. And even if they never try again, the damage is done, not to your body, but to your certainty. You will never taste without doubt again. That night, you're called to a private meal. Just you and the king. The room is small, quiet, candlelit. A single dish sits on the table. No guards, no steward, just him and you. He gestures for you to sit. You do. He lifts his spoon. "I assume you've considered retirement," he says. You say nothing. He chuckles. Everyone does. Eventually. He takes a bite, chews, swallows, then adds, "But few survive long enough to get the offer." You meet his eyes. He doesn't blink. "You've served well." He continues, "Loyalty is a currency I value." You nod. "It's a dangerous one," you say. He smiles faintly, "The only kind worth anything." He gestures to the bowl between you. "I had this made specially. My mother used to make it. Simple, honest, no tricks." You look at it: broth, some barley, a sliver of meat. You pick up your spoon. You taste. It's warm, comforting, real, and yet your tongue still checks for bitterness. still parses every note. Old habits don't die. They just soften. Good. He asks. You nod. Good. He leans back. You could leave. You know, I could see to it. Quietly. Respectfully. No questions asked. You study him. He's not bluffing. But he's not offering either. He's giving you the illusion of choice, the same way poison gives the illusion of flavor. I'll think about it, you say. He nods. You already are. Then he stands. The meal is over. You're dismissed. Not with words, but with silence. That evening, you return to your quarters. You retrieve the satchel you'd hidden so long ago, the strip of cloth, the stone, the garden page. You fold them carefully. You add a new item, a small, carved spoon, your own, smoothed over years of use. It feels right, not as a weapon, as a relic. You set the bag down, you sit on your bed, and for the first time in years, you breathe deeply. You know the cycle may continue. You know tomorrow could bring a new attempt, or not. That's no longer the point, because now you've seen the edge. You've stood at the mouth of the machine and not been swallowed whole. And whether you stay or go, whether you retire to goats or die at supper, you understand the truth. You were never just a taster. You were the final test, the guardian of breath, the last flavor before fate. And tonight, you sleep, not because it's safe, but because it's quiet, and sometimes, in your world, that's enough. The candles have long since burned down. The plates have been cleared, the king is asleep, and the kitchen is silent for once. No knives, no clatter, no barked orders echoing down the halls. Just the hush that follows when tension finally exhales. You lie on your cot, eyes open, watching the flicker of moonlight slide across the stone wall. It doesn't matter what day it is. There are no weekends in your world, no birthdays off, only meals. And you survived another one. The pain is gone now, just a memory in your limbs. A story your bones might tell someday. If bones could whisper, you let your breath slow. The kind of slow that doesn't call attention to itself. The kind that says, for now, nothing is required of you. For now, your tongue can rest. Your stomach can trust. Your heart doesn't need to race ahead of every bite. You think of the fig from earlier, of the stew, of the king's voice in that small, candlelit room. You let those thoughts drift out of you, like smoke rising from a fire that's finally burned down to embers. Tomorrow may bring more danger, or it may not, but you'll meet it as you always have, quietly, precisely, mouth first, because that's the work, and somehow, even now, you carry it with a strange kind of dignity. So sleep now. Let the castle fade behind your eyes. Let the kitchens fall silent. Let the feast wait for someone else. You've earned this rest.